Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. She walks quickly, her eyes wide, her lips locked, her blonde hair bouncing buoyantly on her shoulders as she moves swiftly down the sidewalk. The clip-clop sound of her corked-heeled sandals batter the pavement with a fast knocking pace that increases in intensity as she speedily moves forward. With a steady gait, she clutches her purse tightly to her side, almost as if she's half expecting someone dangerous to pounce out of the looming shadows, to jump out on her unaware, to snatch her prized possession away from her that contains her money and all her credit cards. This is a small North American town, where crime does not usually have the audacious audacity to puncture its talons in this side of the world. And when it does, it happens so fleetingly that the residents are quick to overlook such minuscule offences, as they are few and far between. Perhaps it is the cast-iron city girl in her that makes this woman more reticent to trust, and yet what she's doing tonight is possibly one of the most courageous things she's ever done before. Foolish maybe, but courageous most certainly. She's determined to go through with it. This is the ultimate way to extract her revenge on the man who's been fooling around on her for goodness knows how long. Sometimes a girl's got to do what a girl's got to do. And Marilyn may be many things, but she's no pushover. The night is tenebrous, with a slight edginess to it, that leaves Marilyn slightly unsettled. The moonlight is minuscule, but the rounded luminescent bulbs perched on top of the tall street lamps, and the lights from the shops, boutiques, and restaurants in the town inject the night with a cheerful kaleidoscope of bright colours, so that her pathway is visibly clear. The young woman physically shudders as she recollects the haunting memory of seeing the photographs of her boyfriend locked in the arms of another woman. And boy, did it sting. So this is what it felt like to be cheated on. She'd always wondered about that. She'd never experienced hurt like this before, and hoped to never again. Of course she had known of friends who'd been in relationships where infidelity was involved. But boy, it was a whole different ball game when it actually happened to you. It was viciously cruel. It was like being in a buoyant gas balloon one minute that is ruthlessly deflated the next. So it pops, explodes, and the gas dwindles away into the ether until it is no more. Just a brief, colourful impression that graces the sky for a second and is long forgotten. It would seem her boyfriend had been like an empty earthenware jug that she mistakenly thought was full to overflowing, harbouring a precious priceless oil that she would always treasure and cherish most greatly. But all the time, there was nothing in there at all. She had studied the cell phone photographs intently, taken by her well-meaning friend, who had spotted her boyfriend out and about, his arms draped over another woman. But there were no doubts. The pictures were definitely of him. Underneath it all, if she was being brutally honest with herself, she'd always secretly sensed he was a player. But she'd told herself she was imagining things. for he had never, ever given her reason to doubt his integrity. But now, the evidence was plain to see. The way Dennis is looking at the young woman in the photograph is the way that Marilyn wished he'd look at her. Maybe he had looked at her like that once upon a time, many moons ago, but not any more. And yet his romantic withdrawal from her had been so subtle, so delicately slight. She barely noticed it at all. But things were not how they'd once been in the very beginning. But she thought that that was the normal progression of a relationship, when it drives past the honeymoon stage, becoming deeper and more meaningful. Who was she kidding? Had she been lying to herself all along, seeing what she didn't want to see, what was staring her in the face all along, like a blazing red traffic light? But she was like a blind driver, driving aimlessly, without really seeing where she was going. She and Dennis had been together for over 7 years, but he had never wanted to get married, feigning all kinds of excuses about how now wasn't the right time for him. Maybe next year, he would say. And now she knew why. It would seem that Dennis had a commitment aversion, and while she had waited on tender hooks for him to pop the question, it had never ever happened. The man had absolutely no intention of settling down with her in the first place. She had put her blind faith in him. He thoroughly enjoyed being the kept man, and the perks of benefiting from her father's hefty allowance she received every month, complemented by her paycheck, that suited him most favourably, and he had not been remotely hesitant or bashful in spending her money on himself. She had been an absolute fool. She reflects back to her father's conversation, how she loved her father, for he was the one she could turn to when her world came crumbling and crashing down. He had always been her steadfast rock, the dependable soft place to lay down her head during the storms of life, of which there had not been too many. But it looked like the weather on the horizon was looking exceedingly grim and downcast, with no hope of a mere glimmer of sunshine. That looked like an unfeasible dream. Her father had taken her into his study to talk to her. "You know I love you, Marilyn, more than life itself," he had told her. "But I'm deeply troubled about this man of yours. You know I want you to be happy, more than anything in the world, sweetheart. If Dennis was serious about you, don't you think he would have asked you to marry him a long time ago? I wasted no time in proposing to your mother. When I saw what a diamond she was, I wasn't going to let her go. But this man of yours is taking his time. There's something about him that irks me greatly. I feel he's not responsible. I think he's only interested in pleasing himself and no one else. All this stuff about him and his friends becoming the next big boy band, he's incredulous. It's tough to make it in the music industry, you know. Many people are hankering after exactly the same dream. Has he not thought of getting a proper job? There's nothing wrong with having a passion, but the man should be able to provide for his family. But Dennis is not lifting a finger, is he, to contribute to your living costs? My guess is you're paying all the bills. Am I right, or am I right?" "Oh, Dad, don't be so mean. Dennis has dreams, you know. You've always said it was good to dream, didn't you? Besides, he doesn't want to propose until he's made enough money."
"It's good to have dreams, sweetheart, but it's also good to have a paycheck. No one can live on fresh air, can they? That man should be doing something, even if it's flipping burgers at McDonald's. But doing nothing, beyond a dream that may or may not come into fruition, is like smoking hot air. It's like living in limbo. That man needs a reality check."
She had dismissed her father's comments, but as usual, he was right on the money. Why did she always take what her father said with a pinch of salt? Her wizened old long-lived father, who was 70 years young, did not suffer fools gladly, and had taken an instant dislike to Dennis from the first moment that they'd actually met. Marilyn's parents had invited the young couple over to dinner. They'd both been excited to meet the new man in her life, but the disappointment her parents had felt had been quite unmistakable. It was like they were expecting to receive delivery of a grand sports car, and then they discovered they'd received a battered old Ford instead, that belonged in the knacker's yard and was good for nothing except scrap metal. Well, that's the only way that Marilyn could describe the disenchanted expressions on their faces when she introduced Dennis to them. Even in his appearance, he looked like a boy-band wannabe, with a cute baby face and wispy brown hair that stood up on his scalp like a shark fin in the ocean. And then there were those piercing brown eyes of his, framed by thick black lashes. The look that her father gave Dennis she would never forget in a hurry. It was as if he was looking through a glass pane and could see him as he really was, and he hadn't liked what he'd seen, nor had her mother for that matter. Throughout that meal, her mother had looked at her with sorrowful eyes, almost as if she was grieving her daughter's choice in men, like you would a deceased loved one that had passed on. At the time, she thought her parents were being dramatic, William Shakespeare kind of dramatic. Now she knows they weren't. She had failed to listen to their heedful pragmatism and discriminating shrewdness over and over again, and yet they'd always been proved right. She still never learnt from her mistakes. She never listened. Her stubbornness and blatant obstinacy always meant she thought she knew better, but her denial and dismissal invariably always came back to bite her. "I don't like your parents," Dennis had barked after the family meal, when they returned home to her apartment. At the time he was driving her truck, as he couldn't afford one of his own. But a year later, due to his cunning manipulation and persuasiveness, she would dutifully buy him a truck for his own birthday. He continues begrudgingly, "The way they were looking at me, especially your father, I knew they didn't like me. When I told your father that I'm part of a band, I could see he was very disapproving. I mean, I've already done 6 gigs. He said to me, 'Yes, but what is your proper job?' I mean, how dare he judge me so contemptuously? He clearly thinks I should work on the stock exchange or in a bank or something. I'm not good enough for his precious little girl. That was the impression he gave me. I mean, this is my proper job, and I wish he would respect me for what I do as a profession." "Well, it's not really a profession, is it, Dennis? A profession is when you make money. You and your band have not made much money together. To be fair, I'm paying for everything, aren't I, out of my wages, and of course my father's allowance. You're not contributing anything, are you?" "Lovely. So you're going to side with your father and his misguided opinions, are you? They've got old-fashioned principles, your parents, and to them playing a guitar and singing is not a job. But times have changed, have they not? It's not like it was when conventional jobs were all the rage, when your father was a boy. It's different now, and he's judging me unfairly." "No, but my dad is absolutely right. I mean, it's really hard to break into the music industry. You know how fickle it is. It might be a good idea to explore other options and enjoy your music on the side, and hope that somewhere down the line someone will actually recognise your talent and give you the helping hand you need." "Hope someone down the line might actually notice my talent. Listen to yourself, Marilyn. You know how it is in the music industry. You have to put yourself out there to be noticed. If I'm doing another job, how on earth am I going to be putting myself out there? You tell me that. How will I do that? I'll be hiding my light under a bushel, and then no one will ever notice me." "If there is a light to hide," Marilyn had mumbled under her breath.
"What did you say, Marilyn? I didn't hear you."
Nothing. I was just musing, that's all." Marilyn had longed to tell Dennis what she really thought, but she didn't have the heart to hurt his feelings. She thought her boyfriend had an insipid, watery, rather bland voice, and she wasn't alone in this opinion either. Indeed, he had been told by countless professionals in the profession not to waste his time, as his voice just wouldn't crack it for record deals. But Dennis refused to be beaten by other people's negative commentary. I suppose it was incredible that he believed in himself so tenaciously, whereas Marilyn had always doubted herself. Maybe this was why she was so attracted to Dennis in the first place. A free spirit that could not be discouraged no matter how much you beat him down. A man with an ego bigger than New York. But sometimes that ego of his could be his greatest undoing. Needless to say, her father had told her that Dennis was an obsequious scrounger. At the time, she thought her father was overprotective and judgmental,
who clearly thought no one was good enough for her. She had been so mad at her father for failing to understand what she and Dennis had together, but their relationship had been hot air all along. She had wasted 7 long years of her life on this complete loser who had been taking full advantage of her. Did he even love her? She seriously doubted it. This was not the way you treated someone you love. She had only herself to blame for her ignorant naivety. As she ambles along the road, her whole body shakes like a jelly, not from fear nor anxiety, but from sheer indignation. In her mind's eye, she would love to go to Dennis's wardrobe and cut out the crotch area of all his pants. That's what some women did in the movies to extract their revenge. And the idea rather appealed to her. But that was almost too easy. She needed to get him where it really hurt, his ego. The plan she had in mind was so much better. That way he might feel what she's feeling right now. And that would be a good start. She's now on the street in town she knows like the back of her hand. Her phone hugs the back pocket of her white jeans, the intrusive rectangular shape peering rudely through the fabric. It shudders and vibrates, and so she pulls it out of the pocket to read the message. Might be running a few minutes late. She taps in a reply. No worries. See you when I see you. I'm the one wearing the red scarf. Can't wait to finally meet you. Smiley face and heart. Me too, comes the reply. She smiles as she replaces the phone into her purse, as leaving it in the back of her jeans is not a good idea. Finally, she clip-clops to the bar. Her manicured toenails peer through the sandals, a very beguiling pearly pink. She knows she looks good tonight, and her faith in her appearance is promptly rewarded by the appraisals of men in the bar, who give her an approving once-over. She doesn't really like drawing attention to herself, but today is all about drawing attention to herself. Indeed, she wants to be noticed as revenge, and making her boyfriend jealous is all part of the great plan. She can only hope someone who knows her will see her and report back to her boyfriend. That's exactly what she wants. People talk in this small town, and word gets around faster here than social media. And Marilyn is relying on the efficiency of gossiping tongues. She surreptitiously scans the people drinking around the bar, some sitting around tables, trying to not make it look too obvious. She's happy to see a few regulars there, some casting her furtive glances. This is very good news indeed. By the looks of things, her masterful plan will roll forward seamlessly. Now some of the locals will witness her with her date, and she'll make absolutely certain she's outrageously flirtatious. She can see Tom Tanner. He's sitting over there in the corner, pretending not to look, but he keeps glancing over in her direction as he drinks his beer, wiping the foam from his white moustache. His steely blue eyes don't miss a beat. Tom Tanner is a big talker in town. She can already see him saying to Dennis, "So you and your girl, Marilyn, no longer are an item, is that right? I saw her with another man in the bar, getting very cosy together. They looked like they'd been seeing each other for quite a long time." She'd love to be a fly on the wall when Dennis hears this discomposing news. She could see his face growing thunderously red as he learns that the sweet, faithful, devoted, loyal girlfriend of his is cheating on him behind his back. She knows that Dennis has an unbridled ego on him, and his girlfriend cheating on him so outrageously is going to go down like a ton of bricks. He'll be raving mad, likely to go ballistic, and she really hopes he hurts from the offence as much as he has hurt her. That's the best revenge. Play them at their own game. See how they like it then. Revenge is a dish best served cold, after all. The bar is relatively upmarket. She can hear the ebullient chatter of people's elevated voices. Men and women are gathered together around tables, drinking fancy cocktails. Ice tinkles in glasses. Laughter impregnates the air. She has come here on a Saturday evening with Dennis quite often, but arriving here alone without a partner has already invited curious attention and speculative questionable comment. She waves warmly at a few of the locals, who know her by name, who give her a convivial nod, watching her with an officious interest. It makes her feel safe to be in familiar territory. What could possibly go wrong with meeting a stranger here? The floor is carpeted with an opulent, rich red carpet.
and oakwood tables are surrounded by plush velvety upholstered chairs, while the bar is artfully displayed with all kinds of liqueurs and alcoholic beverages. The barman saunters over to her table, with a bright smile on his face, asking her if she'd like a drink. She opts for the cocktail of the day, a Caribbean cruiser, and it's promptly delivered to her table with an umbrella, a little tiny hat, and a glacé cherry. She sips the drink and swallows the cocktail cherry. It's delicious and punchy. She can taste pineapple and coconut and a touch of rum. It's surprisingly good. Very good, actually. She knows better than to drink too much tonight. She may want her boyfriend to think she's cheating on him, but that's the only impression she wants to create. She knows she's using this man she will meet shortly, just for a few drinks, that is. She doesn't want a relationship with a stranger, but on the dating site he looked to be the kind of man that would almost certainly provoke her boyfriend to jealousy, with quintessential ingredients that would easily work. Good-looking, bright, successful. That's enough. Of course she does know that dating sites are notoriously unreliable and can't easily be trusted. People posting up pictures of themselves done in flattering lighting over a decade ago. And then there were catfishers pretending to be something they actually weren't. But she got a sense that this man was whom he claimed to be. At least she hopes he is. She waits and waits and waits, but the stranger never appears. How annoying! Why is he taking so very long? She has already drunk a few cocktails, and her heart sinks like a boulder crashing reluctantly to the bottom of a lake. Lovely. She's been stood up. This is not what she had in mind. She could see Tom Tanner saying, "I saw your girl at the bar, sitting on her lonesome, drinking Caribbean cruisers. She looked very lonely." Now she's beginning to feel like a fool. The anger she was feeling has grown exponentially. Right now she wants to throw a hissy fit, like a little girl would. She feels enraged, and then she sees a brief light at the end of a long tunnel, as a relatively good-looking man walks up to the table with 2 Caribbean cocktails in his hands, and he hands one to her with a broad beam on his face. First impressions, he seems nice enough. "I couldn't help noticing you all on your own. The name is Morris." "I'm Marilyn," she says. "Good to meet you." She decides clandestinely to herself. He'll do nicely for the purposes she has at hand. The perfect candidate to get her boyfriend jealous. All I must do is act like I've known him for ages, and flirt outrageously, and give the performance of my life. She glances in Tom Tanner's direction, and smiles inwardly to herself. His eyes are directly pinned on her. He's watching her every move. This is exactly what she was hoping for. "Oh, it's lovely to see you, Morris. It's very kind of you. I simply love these Caribbean cruises. So delicious," she says, taking a gulp of the cocktail from the glass, acting in a forward way that gives onlookers the distinct impression that she's known Morris for ages, and that takes the man somewhat aback himself.
"Do I know you?"
"Of course not," she says, running her hand across his arm in a flirtatious gesture, glancing up briefly at the bar to check that Tom Tanner is indeed watching. Good. His mouth is hanging open like a Venus flytrap. He's definitely gawking. Good. This is going exactly as she planned. Marilyn barely remembers much about Morris at all. After the cocktail he handed her, she feels weak at the knees, as if she can't support her own body weight. She remembers everything going fuzzy. What's going on? Why does she suddenly feel as if her head is spinning around and around? She can't even think clearly, nor can she string any sentences together. She feels as if she's going to pass out, as if her entire body is about to collapse.
"Oh, she's all right,"
she hears Morris saying.
"No, I think I'm going to take her back home. She's had one too many of those Caribbean cruises. But she's Dennis's girl, isn't she?"
She is sure she hears Tom Tanner's voice.
"What are you doing with her? I haven't seen you around here before." "That's right, I'm Dennis's brother." "Oh, I didn't know Dennis had a brother. You must forgive me. I had no idea. I thought you were hitting on this woman."
Marilyn's account in her own words. "I knew after I drank that cocktail that Morris brought me that I'd been drugged. I was slurring my words. I was unable to speak coherently. My whole world became hazy, foggy, blurred. I remember tottering along, holding on to Morris for dear life, as if he was a telegraph pole giving me much-needed support. I knew I would keel over, fall down, collapse. I wanted to shout out for help. I really did. But I was in such a delirious, foggy haze, and anything that came out of my mouth was merely a mumble. It felt like I was stumbling around in the darkness, looking for the light, while on the deck of a rocky boat, under the penalty of gruesome, tumultuous weather conditions and heavy storms. I seemed to have faded into oblivion, as I don't remember a thing after that, for I drift into the floating clouds of a fluffy unconsciousness and melt into a world where obscure memories are lost, and recollections bury themselves like crabs in the sand. I do not remember the car journey itself, for I was out for the count, lost in a world where dreams are ransomed, thoughts hijacked and stolen, judicious reasoning snatched away, like a wallet from a purse. I do recollect suddenly waking up, when I heard the car door slam behind itself. I sit up with a start, momentarily rudely aroused, startled from my dreamless sleep, to find myself strapped to a seat unwillingly, in a stranger's car, on the passenger side of an unfamiliar truck. We're at a gas station that is flooded with a bright light, but beyond the gas station, everything is dark. I glance out of the passenger side window and have no understanding or comprehension of where we are. There is nothing familiar about my environment at all. I can see the figure of Morris filling the truck with petrol, watching the gauge, blindly oblivious that I'm wide awake, well, awake enough to fathom what this is all about. I've been abducted by this obnoxious man, against my own will. I very much doubt his real name is Morris. Suddenly, rather than looking like a handsome man, he has become an ugly predator, a dangerous foe. I have no recollection of agreeing to accompany him on this trip, but I do remember soon after drinking that cocktail feeling incredibly dizzy. He must have clandestinely slipped something into that Caribbean cocktail. I'm sure he's given me that date-rape drug I've heard about before, for nefarious reasons. God only knows what his iniquitous intentions are towards me, but I know that they're not good. I feel so sluggish, so tired. I know I need to get out of his truck, or God only knows what will happen to me. But I'm fighting this losing, precarious battle with my own body that is seriously letting me down, not accommodating my need to move whatsoever. My legs feel like jelly beneath me. If I close my eyes, even for a moment, I know I will fall asleep. It was like I was so exhausted I could barely keep my eyes open, like when you're trying to pull through from being anaesthetized after an operation. It can be exceedingly difficult to come through that delirious foggy haze and try to mobilize your body through that incapacitating state, as it's almost a fate that is impossible to accomplish. Don't go to sleep, my mind screams. Don't you dare go to sleep. Don't go to sleep. Don't go to sleep. You cannot go to sleep. When Morris walks into the gas station to pay the attendant for the petrol, I can see him talking and laughing gregariously at the attendant, waving cash in his hands as he pays the man. I just quickly climb out of his car, minus my high-heeled cork sandals, as they would seriously slow me down. When I see the wood grove on the opposite side of the road, I run eagerly towards it as fast as I can, but my run is like a dithering, frantic scramble to desperately find some cover. A large congregation of tall trees, obscured by the darkness, comes distinctly into view. They are a welcome sight for me, an opportunity to become one with the shadows, to melt in the darkness, to become invisible. My legs feel like they're weighed down by heavy, unobliging concrete blocks. As I trudge ever forward, every step an arduous, painful struggle. I cross the long grey ribbon of asphalt, which is surprisingly warm under my feet, using every last bit of available energy that is left within me to heave me into the woods. I'm virtually dragging myself. I'm sweating profusely. My breathing is heavy. I am like a car trying to thrive on that last tiny drop of precious petrol to get to my destination. I need to hide out in the woodgrove to sleep off my groggy state, and then get help in the morning. Morris could come looking for me, When he discovers I've abandoned his truck, he might guess I've run into the woodgrove on the opposite side of the road from the gas station. But it's so dark. I could be anywhere in these trees. The sprawling woods stretch out forever. He's unlikely to find me. I don't have my purse with me, which contains my cell phone, but I didn't see it in Morris's truck anyway. But even if it was right beside me, I probably wouldn't have noticed it. I'm far too disorientated, far too groggy, far too confused. I am now in the woodgrove. My delicate feet are getting furiously scratched from the sharp leaf litter and twigs under my feet. But I don't allow the piercing scratches or painful jabs to discourage me, as angry thorns pierce through my skin, showing me no mercy. But I don't cry out. My focus is entirely on finding some form of cover. I cannot see a bloody thing. It is so incredibly dark. Even my hand before my face has become invisible. Although the woodgrove is very scary, very intimidating, very bodeful and menacing at night, it's a whole lot more reassuring than being stuck in a truck with a stranger against my will. I had heard enough harrowing stories in my life of people in North America going missing. I didn't want to become another one of those stats that mysteriously vanishes off the radar, never to be seen or heard from again. I climb cautiously down onto my hands and knees, walking on all fours, feeling around, because it's a struggle, impossible to stand up on my 2 feet. I manage to find a fallen dead tree trunk in the woodgrove, surrounded by long grass. So I bury myself into the grass, close to this tree trunk, dropping down like a dead weight. It hadn't even occurred to me to worry about coyotes, bears, wolves, or mountain lions. And I'm glad I didn't allow those thoughts to entertain my mind, as Morris was the only monster that I was trying to escape. When I wake up, I find I'm being sprinkled with droplets of sunshine that filter across my face, nudging me wide awake. It's a pleasant feeling you get, rather like when you're sunbathing. I open my eyes slowly to discover that I'm looking at the leafy boughs of a tree dappled with viridescent foliage that cover me like a fragrant umbrella, while a soft sunshine twinkles between the branches and caresses my cheeks like a warm fan. I wake up with a sudden start, a jolt actually, when I come to the stunning, befuddling realization that my current whereabouts is more than a little odd, peculiar. Why am I not in my comfortable bed at home? This thought is very strange to me. I glance down at myself to see that I'm covered with a deer hide, and I find myself on a flat wooden solid platform, high up on a tree. The platform has been made of timber beams tied together with leather strips from animal skins. It's incredibly well built, sturdy, strong. The timber beams are covered with deer pelts. Where the hell am I? What am I doing on this platform in the high branches of a tree? And more to the point, how on earth did I get here? I then remember the ominous, horrifying events of the previous night. They come flooding back into my mind like a bad nightmare. I remember I must have been drugged and placed into Morris's truck. And when he stopped for petrol, that was when I'd managed to escape. It was a miracle I had been compos mentos for long enough to make the trip to the woodgrove. But now, what am I doing high up on a tree like this? None of this makes any rational sense to me, and there's no way I have the courage to come down this tree myself. I'm really high up, and I'm terrified of heights, and I'm so high in the branches, surrounded by hundreds of other trees all around me. When I stand up on the sturdy platform, I can see there are trees everywhere, and a blue sky above me that sparkles brightly through the foliage. All of a sudden I hear a rustle. Then I see leafy boughs being pulled away, as an agile figure looks through the branches at me. The face is so human, I'm almost taken aback. It's a feminine face with eyes so kind that the fear that I would normally feel from such an idiosyncratic encounter is eclipsed. No one could look at these eyes and feel any kind of fear. They are just filled with love. I realize at once that this creature is a female Bigfoot. There is no doubt in my mind about that. I'd even seen the Patterson footage taken all those years ago. But this creature is much more human-looking than the picture I remembered seeing. She's lean, slender, graceful, and incredibly Herculean in size. exceedingly well built, her body ripped with muscular definition and tone. I notice she's covered in long, silky, flowing dark hair, the colour of a black bear. And I don't notice any offensive smells that are often reported about in encounters. In truth, she smells pleasantly earthy, rather woody actually. Unsurprisingly, like any professional athlete, her breasts are small and very pert. The creature looks at me and speaks to me in a strange language that I don't understand, but I know what she's saying. She's pointing to the forest. Amiki abo anada abosha. I found you in the forest. It wasn't safe for you lying there on the floor like that. I brought you up here. I knew you would be safe. Of course, I don't know word for word if that is what she was actually saying, but as odd as it may sound, I felt as if it was, as if in some way she was surreptitiously communicating through my mind, as I understood everything she appeared to be saying. The creature moves towards me. She possesses a matriarch type of energy, like a fussing grandmother. She puts her hand on my forehead, as if testing my temperature, and then indicates for me to follow her finger, which I do. And then up and down, to the side. She seems satisfied. She pats me on the shoulder and speaks again. I'm sure she's saying, "You're much better." Apaket abolobo anadobo aji. I indicate to the forest floor. I need to go, I explain to her. There's a gas station opposite the road there. The creature nods as if she understands. She throws me on her back, holding me with one hand, while she bounces down the tree with such superb dexterity. Before I have a chance to even protest, I'm now on the earthen floor of the forest. The Bigfoot guides me through the woods, watching over me all the time, as if worried I'm going to pass out. But she seems reassured that I'm fine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for helping me. You have no idea what you've done for me. I'm so grateful. I reach out to give her a hug. It was the most natural thing in the world for me to do. And I can see by her eyes my actions have moved her to the quick. I feel so tiny in her arms. She looks so genuinely touched by my warmth. She pats me affectionately on the back, and in my bare feet that are now ripped and literally torn to shreds, I walk across the warm road. The female Bigfoot watches me until she sees me disappear into the gas station, and then she's gone, vanished from my sight, disappeared into the woods. She needed to be absolutely reassured that I was fine. Talk about showing me the ultimate form of compassion. How could I ever forget her incredible kindness towards me? Can you help me? Can you help me? I say to the woman in the gas station. Last night this man, he put something in my drink. I think it was that date rape drug. I found myself in his truck. I think he had to put... I think he was trying to abduct me. I managed to wake up for a few minutes when we were at the gas station. I went and hid in the forest over there. Do you think I could phone my dad quickly? I want him to pick me up. Will you speak to him? Give him directions how to get here.
You poor thing. My dear, you must sit down, says the woman at the gas station, taking me into her arms and giving me a huge hug. I begin to sob in her chest, so relieved to be safe. Now there, she says, would you like some hot chocolate or coffee? Even a latte? What do you fancy? A chocolate, I say. A hot chocolate would be lovely. The woman smiles at me. I knew it. When a woman has a shock of any kind, it's not coffee that she gravitates to. It's always chocolate. It never fails to lift the spirit. When my father arrived at the gas station a couple of hours later, he was very unsettled. I told him the entire story from start to finish, and how I'd tried to make Dennis jealous, and a perfect stranger had drugged me with the date rape drug and thrown me into his truck, and how an ambiguous idiosyncratic Bigfoot had taken me up to the top of a tree to sleep off my sluggishness and to keep me safe from predators, and possibly even Morris himself if he'd been sniffing around while I was lost in my oblivion.
Bloody bastard, said my father. We'll go to the police later and report this dreadful incident, as this man, whoever he is, I imagine has done this before. It's a miracle you woke up while you were in his truck. Sometimes those drugs will knock you out, and you'll never remember even a fleeting thing.
Dad, I don't know how I did it. I was so sleepy.
You did it, sweetheart, because when push comes to shove, you're made of tough stuff. But let's go back to your apartment right now to get rid of that loser boyfriend of yours once and for all. I always knew he was no good, but I had to sit back and wait for you to find this out for yourself. But you know what, sweetheart? I get you're hurting, and I get you wanted revenge, but I think sometimes the easiest thing is to just tell them to go. Playing games can lead to all kinds of problems.
I just wanted him to hurt, Dad. I wanted him to feel what it felt like to be cheated on. I wanted him to hurt like he'd hurt me.
I can understand that, sweetheart. Really I can. But as for that female Bigfoot rescuing you, what an incredible story. Now that really is something for the books. Wow, those creatures are clearly intelligent.
Then you believe me?
Of course I believe you. You know, I always knew Bigfoots were real. And there is so much more to this world than we can possibly imagine. What a marvellous creature to show you so much compassion.
When we get to my apartment, my boyfriend is lying fast asleep on the couch, with his guitar on one of the upholstered chairs, and a plethora of beer cans scattered around him. I notice he hadn't even made it to bed that night.
Wake up, Dennis, says my father, poking him in the shoulder.
Dennis opens his eyes. He sits up with a jerk, quickly straightening himself up, stroking his hair backwards.
Sir, what are you doing here? He says,
his eyes glancing from me to my father.
I could ask you the same thing, Dennis. What are you doing in my daughter's apartment? I live here, sir. Me and your daughter, we are... What are you, Dennis? Give me a break. You and my daughter are in no partnership together. You've been cheating on her. You think you're in a partnership when you cheat. You're a tow rag, Dennis, a complete, total and utter loser, and my daughter wants nothing more to do with you.
My dad's right. I never ever want to see you again, Dennis, as long as I live. You disgust me. Now get the hell out of my apartment. Dennis opens and closes his mouth like a goldfish, but no words come out. I can see his face is flushing bright pink. He looks cornered like a frightened animal.
Hurry up, Dennis. We can't wait here all day. We've got things we need to do. You need to go. But where will I go, sir? I've got no money, nowhere to stay. You should have thought about that before you cheated on my daughter, shouldn't you, Dennis?
At least Dennis knows better than to protest his innocence and argue with my father. We watch as he gathers all his things, packing them in his truck, the one I bought him. Oddly enough, I do get my revenge. He looks so pathetic, with his tail tucked between his legs. And then he drives away. I hasten to say I never ever saw him again. Last I heard, he's scrounging on some other woman, and his musical career appears to remain in mute. To cut a long story short, the police were looking for the man who had abducted me. A string of women reported waking up in his bed, with no recollection of what had actually happened to them. He had claimed they had come willingly to his bed, but they couldn't remember a thing about it. I'm very glad he was arrested, thanks to the camera footage at the gas station, which enabled him to be easily identified. It seemed he'd put up a fake profile on that dating site on my cell phone, as part of his insidious plan. So I'd been texting him all along. I was very fortunate to wake up for a brief second from that drug, something which rarely happens according to the police. So I was exceedingly lucky. As for the Bigfoot I met, she lives on in my heart, for she helped me in my rock-bottom moment, and for that I am truly grateful. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, she comes out at night when the small town sleeps, and all that can be heard is the sound of crickets and frogs that serenade the night with their soulful but mellow orchestral music. Their cheerful trills and croaks have become to her like unlikely friends. She is well acquainted with the night, as much as the coyotes, raccoons and foxes that have sometimes crossed her path. many that have become familiar to her idiosyncratic presence that even they cannot fathom or comprehend. Most humans abandon the night, like something to fear, but this young woman seizes it with open arms, welcomes it, and holds it close to her in a loving embrace, for it writes her a doctor's script of freedom, safety, and comfort. Much like her indigenous nightly friends that she often encounters, she likes to sink discreetly into the shadows, disappearing into obscurity, remaining unobserved, unseen, undetected by curious prying eyes. For the darkness has become a motherly matriarch towards her that does not judge her or single her out for being different. When she ventures out of her grandmother's apartment, situated above the nail bar in town, that is owned by her sister Ruth, she ventures out very quietly, discreetly, accessing the stairwell at the back, and even her sneakers whisper silently on the steps, and not even a squeak is imparted or heard, as she graciously glides down those steps one by one, without even making a sound. She ambles gracefully down the streets, her head hidden beneath the soft flapping folds of her hoodie, so that to anyone that might pass her by, they will not see her clearly. No one would pay her much attention, and that is what she wants, for she does not want to be seen. She does not want to be observed, nor does she want to be noticed. The lighted wire-framed figurine of the caricature lady in the nail bar, with the neon pink sign in her hands that reads nails, grabs her attention, as it flashes brightly through the shop window panes, like a Christmas tree, on and off, on and off, on and off. She can see a long row of pink and gold upholstered couches, and several rows of glass tables, where her sister's clients sit for manicures and pedicures at the salon. It's become a thriving, prosperous business for her sister Ruth, bringing the family much financial support. The street is silent. It's about 2:00 in the morning. The rounded bulbs of light, perched elegantly on the long vertical poles of the street lamps, cast a bright enough illumination for her to see very clearly. The silence is golden, as she navigates her way past coffee shops, boutiques and restaurants, all that she knows rather well. There isn't a solitary soul in sight. She likes it this way, for she feels cocooned in safety and security when nobody is around. When she sees a person merely glance in her direction, even though she is inconspicuous, hiding surreptitiously behind the velvety cover of her hoodie, she'll still hyperventilate, breathe heavily, and sweat will come pouring down her face in raindrops. She can't bear to be looked at. There's a breeze nuzzling her skin, kissing her gently with cool air, which makes her feel vibrantly alive. She is trapped in an apartment all day, with only her grandmother and daytime TV for company, along with the occasional visit from Ruth taking a swift coffee break from the nail bar downstairs, who spills all the beans on the comings and goings in town. As much like a hairdresser, Ruth is updated regularly about the locals in town, who's getting a divorce, who's getting married, who's having a baby, and sometimes, if she's lucky, the gossip might actually be juicier. Sometimes she sits upstairs, and with her binoculars pinned on the street, she entertains herself by watching the comings and goings of the locals in town. She observes people talking on street corners, laughing and chatting garrulously together, people walking dogs down the sidewalk, conveniently looking away when the dog lifts up its legs to anoint a local dustbin, people carrying bags of heavy shopping in their hands, cars parking across the street corner. Sometimes she doesn't recognize the people, sometimes she does. She wonders if they remember her at all, or has she been long since forgotten? Out of sight, out of mind, she concludes to herself. She used to be pretty once, very pretty as it happens. Indeed, she used to turn heads wherever she went, but not any more. Those days are like a blot on the horizon, or a bird dropping left behind on a windscreen, or a long, distant memory. She knows one thing with certainty, like she knows that the sky is blue, that she'll never be beautiful again. Well, not in the conventional way, not in the way that the world epitomizes beauty. It would be enough just to look normal. She'd settle for that any day of the week. But looking normal has eluded her, escaped her grasp like a dandelion seed blowing away in a feisty wind. Impossible to catch.
There was a time looking in the mirror was actually a regular event for her, but not any more, for she has not looked in a mirror for months. It pains her to even look at herself, to see the damage on the left-hand side of her face. Yet she knows that given her life over again, if she could go back in the pages of time, she would have never done things differently, not even for a second. At the time, Azalea's family had lived in a semi-detached house in town, not too far away from the nail bar. But one night, something quite dreadful happened. And that haunting night is etched on her mind like an indelible tattoo that cannot be erased. When she was a young girl, she had been terrified of fire, so much more so than anything else, and had promptly decided that being burnt alive was the worst possible thing that could ever happen to a human being. She couldn't even look at a wildfire on television without the scene causing her great distress. But one day, her worst fears would come to fruition. It had been an ordinary, unexceptional evening, when she and her sister Ruth had retired to bed earlier than usual. At the time, she was only 22 years old. Ruth was 25. Little Pixie, their French bulldog, was lying at the bottom of her bed fast asleep, snoring loudly. He made the cutest nasal snores when he was asleep, which made the girls laugh. He was quite the little comical character, with his flat pug-like nose and his expressive dark, soulful eyes. Both girls knew exactly what their father intended to do this evening. They had been warned by him that they would possibly hear Hazel Montgomery's aggrieved voice, as she screamed indignantly at him. He pretty much was prepared for a volatile altercation with the disagreeable, capricious woman, who had such a short fuse on her that when she lit up, she exploded like a firework. The children's mother had died when they were very young, after having an asthmatic attack in her car, which veered off the edge of the road, rolling down a steep embankment, where she was killed on impact. The asthma attack had come on so suddenly, it impeded her ability to control the car in time. She had been struggling desperately to breathe, and one thing led to another, with tragic consequences. It had taken her poor father years to come to terms with his wife's fortuitous death. It was only over the last year her father had been set up on a date with Hazel Montgomery by a well-meaning friend in town, who had thought that the kindly gentleman deserved to have a companion. At first the couple had hit it off superbly. It seemed that Hazel loved everything that her father enjoyed, echoing his taste in everything, from music, food, books, television programs, and even sports. For a short while he thought he'd found a soulmate, of a sort. Not that anyone could ever replace their mother, but this woman shone brightly on their lives, like a warm, twinkling, all-embracing sunshine, and even they had at first warmed to her, as in the beginning she had been quite charming. But then slowly and surely the cracks began to show in Hazel's veneer, and the true personality came out, and it wasn't pretty, almost like an ugly sea creature emerging from a shell. At first the shell gave you the impression that what lay beneath it was promisingly beautiful, but not so, for this shell was harbouring a monster. It was devoid of any shimmering pearls. The woman at first, who had seemed so gentle and sweet, began to groan, moan, and really bully their father, until he'd had quite enough of her. "I'm ending it with that woman tonight," he told his two delighted children. "I'm quite sure she's going to have a tantrum. So if you hear her screaming at the top of her voice, don't you worry your pretty heads about a thing. Just carry on sleeping. I've been putting off doing this for ages. It's called procrastination, but I need to do it now. I need to nip it in the bud. If well-meaning townsfolk hadn't tried to match me up with this crackpot, I wouldn't have to deal with her tonight." "Good luck, Dad," says Ruth, giving him a big hug. "I'm sure you'll be very nice to her, Dad. I think all you should do is tell her that she's a very attractive woman, because you need to make sure she feels good about herself, but that you're still desperately in love with your wife who died, and you're just not capable of sharing your heart with another woman, that you're not ready for that." "That's a good idea, Ruth. That's what I will say to her. But your words are true. Apart from Hazel being attractive, of course. But sometimes, for the greater good, white lies need to be told." The two inseparable sisters shared a very close bond together, as losing their mother so young
had meant they became devoted, thick as thieves, insisting in sharing the upstairs bedroom together. They both retreated upstairs quietly, their hearts heavy for their father. They both knew breaking up with the likes of Hazel Montgomery was going to be a monumental task, as that temperamental, erratic woman would likely burst into an obsequious rage. The two girls slept side by side, in opposite single beds, both girls falling fast asleep, their nightly slumber rudely interrupted by Hazel's strident, ear-piercing, shrieking voice that echoed through the house like a shrill ambulance siren. "So you're dumping me, is that it? After all I've done for you and your kids?"
"I'm sorry, Hazel. You and me, we're not working out. I think it's because I'm still desperately in love with my wife."
"Poppycock, Julian! Your wife died over 16 years ago. You're saying you haven't moved on? I've never heard anything so ridiculous in my life. You're just looking for excuses just so that you can end it with me. I know that is what this is about, isn't it?"
"That's exactly what I'm saying, Hazel. It doesn't matter how long ago my wife died. That's irrelevant. She was the love of my life. I can't simply replace her."
"So I'm not good enough for you anymore? Is that what you're saying?"
"Why is it always about you, Hazel? This is not personal. It's not remotely about you. It's all about me. It's about the fact that I'm not ready for a new relationship. Things have been rocky between us for quite a while. You're always angry, volatile, temperamental, having little hissy fits here and there, and quite frankly bullying me all the time. Relationships should not be like this. We're not good for each other, Hazel. We bring the worst out in each other. I just think we need to call it quits."
"How dare you, Julian? How dare you? We've been together for a year now, and you never said a thing until now. Now you tell me all this, and I've invested so much in us."
"I did want to say something earlier. I really did, but you made it very difficult for me."
"But you were too much of a wuss. Is that what you're saying? Too much of a wuss?"
"I didn't want to hurt your feelings, Hazel, if you must know. Otherwise, I would have ended it with you a long time ago. In truth, you're probably right. I was a wuss. I just didn't want to hurt your feelings."
"It's too late for that, Julian. I invested in you, in your children, and now you're ditching me like I'm nothing. You make me sick, Julian. You and your pathetic children. You all make me sick. In truth, I never liked your children very much, but I was willing to put up with them for your sake. But you're pathetic. I hate you. I wish you were dead. You're not going to get away with treating me like this, Julian. You have no idea what I'm capable of, but you'll soon find out, and you'll rue the day that you ever spoke to me like this. You hear what I'm saying? You will rue the day."
"Hazel, if you're saying what I think you're saying, and that you want revenge on me, isn't that silly? Let's be adults about this. We can remain friends. I would like that very much indeed, and so would my children."
"Friends? I'll never be your friend, Julian. Not now, not ever. I hate you. Did you hear what I said? I hate you." They could hear some smashing sounds that ominously gave them the distinct impression that Hazel was having a hissy fit, throwing dishes around the kitchen, like you would hear at a Greek family wedding. Azalea was sure from all the clinking, crashing and walloping sounds there would not be a single plate left in the kitchen cabinet anymore, and the kitchen floor was lightly covered precariously in a confetti of fractured, very jagged-looking broken china. Then quite suddenly the front door slammed, and Ruth ran over to the sash window, lifting up the wooden panel to peer outside. She watched the furious figure of Hazel Montgomery dashing out of their semi-detached house towards her bright pink truck, parked on the opposite side of the street. Her whole body wobbled with indignation, and she looked up at their house, waving a fist at it in a gesture of a boxer punching a boxing bag. She was seething and champing at the bit, like an unbridled horse, and even under the lamplights of the street she looked like her nostrils were actually flaring. "I'll get you back, Julian," she screamed into the night, climbing back into her car and driving away at breakneck speed, her car outwardly expressing her grievances. "Dad's done it," said Ruth proudly. "He's only gone and done it. I'm so pleased for him, Azalea. He must be so, so relieved. She's finally gone from our lives." But her words were spoken too soon, as a short while later, Hazel Montgomery was back knocking on the front door again. Her knocks were aggressive, very determined. "Oh, God, you're not going to believe this, Azalea. She's only come back again," says Ruth. "That woman, she cannot take no for an answer. What the hell is wrong with her?" They heard a shuffling sound, her father saying,
No, that's not necessary, Hazel. No, let's talk about this."
Everything goes very quiet. Moments later they hear Hazel going back to her truck and driving away, so they think all is well. So Azalea and her sister drift off to sleep. Azalea is awakened to the smell of smoke and shafts of icy cold fresh air bursting obtrusively through the bedroom. She wakes up coughing and spluttering as there's smoke in her lungs, and glances towards the landing from her bed as the bedroom door is wide open. She's horrified to see the passageway is consumed by flames that are darting rambunctiously through the sweeping staircase. She can hear the flames pop, sizzle, roar, snap and splutter, and the wood is folding, melting, curling. Everything is being rapidly destroyed by the all-consuming heat of the staircase that is disappearing in front of their very eyes, as it's monopolized by this assiduous, pugnacious fire. There's a fireman peering at them through the now fully open sash window. He shouts down to the fireman on the truck below.
2 girls up here, still alive, still breathing.
He's standing on a ladder.
Your house is on fire, young ladies. You better get out now before it's too late. This is the only room in the house that isn't up in smoke yet. But in any second now it will be engulfed in flames. So for God's sake, hurry up. The house is burning down. The fire is out of control.
What about my dad? Says Azalea.
We've got him, says the fireman. Now hurry. We haven't got any time to lose.
Azalea is heartily relieved. Thank God her father's all right. That's all she needs to concern herself about. Ruth, whom appears to be in a stunned stupor, is not saying a single word. She allows herself to be guided down the ladder, and then it's Azalea's turn.
Hurry up, says the fireman. Hurry up. We haven't got any time to waste.
Fire blasts through the room like an unwanted gatecrasher. It whooshes and glides over the floor in a long yellow stream of ebullient flames, with such a powerful, thrustful force that the room feels like a morgue incinerator. Azalea remembers her little dog Pixie. I can't come without Pixie.
Who's Pixie? Asked the fireman.
My dog.
It's too late for little Pixie, says the fireman. You need to save yourself. This room is not stable. It'll come down in any second.
Azalea doesn't listen. She has to find Pixie, and there he is, cowering under the bed, petrified out of his skull. She grabs Pixie, who trembles and shakes in her arms. The poor dog is absolutely terrified. She hands him to the fireman, who passes him down to the fireman below him. But those extra minutes cost her big time, for the raging heat of this insufferable inferno spares no mercy, as the fire is now whipping up only yards away from her feet, at 6 feet off the ground, beginning to fry one side of Azalea's face like a steak, while her clothes begin to melt and stick to her skin. Before she knows it, she's been ferried down the ladder to safety by the fireman, and a blanket is thrown over her body as a fire retardant, and to subdue the smoke now rising from her, like the smoke from a chimney. The pain is excruciating. She can smell burnt meat. Then she begins to slip into shock as she collapses and finally remembers no more. She is rushed to hospital and wakes up in the burns unit, where she receives extensive care for her wounds, skin grafts, pain management, along with professional counselling. When she first looks at the left-hand side of her face, when the nurse gives her a mirror, she's astounded. She no longer recognises the face staring back at her. Her eyes fill with tears as she runs her hand down the left cheek, where she feels the pits, the hollows, the furrows, the jagged thick bumps caused from the angry scarring. She notices she no longer has much left of her ears, and the scars are a deep crimson blue colour. They're ugly, offensive, like a blight on the landscape of her face. She shudders with horror. This isn't me! This isn't me! I don't know this face anymore. Sweetheart, "I know it looks terribly bad," says the nurse, taking her hand and giving it a tight squeeze. "But you'll receive many more operations and skin surgeries, and I'm sure in time it won't look quite so bad as it does now." "I'll never be pretty again. I wouldn't mind looking normal, but these scars, they're so unsightly. I know people will just stare at me." "If they haven't got anything better to do than stare at you, you should feel sorry for them, if their lives are so shallow. And if they do stare at you, just hold your head up high. You've got nothing to feel ashamed of." When Azalea finally came out of hospital, she was given the very grave news. The news the family had kept clandestinely from her, as they didn't want to jeopardize her healing. None of the smoke detectors in the house had worked, which in itself was an enigmatic mystery. It would seem that her father had been killed in the house fire. Hazel Montgomery had doused him with petrol that night. The whole house had been set on fire. If their bedroom had not been at the furthest corner of the house, both Ruth and her sister Azalea would definitely have perished. Hazel Montgomery was now in a mental facility, receiving medical treatment for all kinds of psychological disorders. Azalea firmly believed that she was a narcissistic personality type who couldn't handle any kind of rejection. Azalea was thrilled that Pixie had been saved. She adored that dog. And it was like he became her very best friend, for he knew she had saved his life, and the bond between the both of them had grown exponentially since the event. When Azalea returned home, she had to grieve not only the loss of her father, but the loss of the girl she had once been, and that was very hard for her to have to do. She did not recognize the girl staring back at her in the mirror. At the time she had a boyfriend who, on seeing her scars, retreated from her life in horror, never to be seen again. Azalea would never forget the look he gave her. It was like he was saying, "My God, you're ugly. I don't want to be seen around with you." The two sisters both moved in with their grandmother, and Ruth opened up her nail bar underneath the apartment. But the moment that Azalea faced the world with her scarred face, people talked, they whispered, they giggled, they taunted, and stared. Once she even heard a little kid saying, Mummy, look at that girl's ugly face. She's got an ugly face, Mummy." The mother had said, "Shh, don't be so rude." She tried to silence her kid by telling him to be quiet, but Azalea had heard it all, and it had really, really hurt. That was the final straw for her, and in her self-conscious, defeated state, Azalea had retreated indoors, and now she only ever went outdoors when the rest of the world was fast asleep. That way she could get up close and personal to nature, without being in the full view and scrutiny of judgmental, condemning spectators who would lightly ogle and stare at her unsightly burns, and she couldn't face the prospect of being a freak show for them. "Honestly, Azalea," her grandmother had said, "it's not as bad as it looks, honey, and once you've seen it, you get used to it, you know. When I look at you, Azalea, I don't see your burns anymore, but I see the Azalea I know and love. My beautiful, beautiful granddaughter. That's what I see." "I'm not beautiful, Granny. I wish you wouldn't say that. I know I'm a freak." "You're a hero. Don't you ever talk about yourself like that. You're not a freak. You saved Pixie's life. You did that. You should be proud of yourself, Azalea. But I really wish you wouldn't hide yourself away from the world like this. It's not good. It's not healthy for you. It's just terrible to see you like this. It grieves my heart. So you want me to go out there, do you? Listen to people passing comment over me? You want me to provide a freak show for people, like the bearded lady or something in the travelling circus? Or on Ripley's Believe It or Not? Don't be like that, Azalea. Many of the locals in town may stare at you in the beginning. I admit that. But in the end, people will get used to you. If you see something often enough, it no longer becomes a topic of conversation. Imagine if every day you go into town and you see a man with a purple face. The first few times you're going to stare at him, as you haven't seen a man with a purple face before, and you're curious and inquisitive about it. But after a while you'll walk past him without even giving him a second glance, because now you're used to the man with the purple face. I believe that's how it'll be for you, Azalea. People will only stare when they're curious and intrigued. Or disgusted, interjects Azalea.
If people will make fun of a fat, obese person wobbling down a street, how much more are they going to pass commentary on me? Who knows what they will call me? Scarface, probably. I don't want to hear them speak about me like that. It really, really hurts, Granny. Of course it hurts, sweetheart. I do understand that. I think you should have some online counselling. But you can't spend your life being disconnected from society. As I keep telling you, it's not healthy for you. It would seem as time passed by, Azalea's grandmother accepted that Azalea didn't want to face people again. She had been in hospital for a few more skin grafts, but the improvements were so minimal. Many locals asked after her, and her grandmother lied on her account, claiming that Azalea was living in another state with a boyfriend. Oh, I heard what happened to her. Poor thing, getting third-degree burns like that. I can't imagine what the poor girl's been through. Good for her moving on with her life, despite everything that's transpired. I certainly salute her for her courage. Little did the locals know that Azalea was living behind closed doors, and like Count Dracula, when the world slept, she'd venture out, but usually she did not take Pixie with her, as at 2 o'clock in the morning he was usually lying fast asleep on her bed, but sometimes at night he had accompanied her on a walk or two, but not tonight. Azalea's account. I never knew what real pain was, until the left-hand side of my body was burnt. I can't describe the pain to you. It's beyond even putting into words. There were times I lost the desire to live, as a pain can be so insufferable that sometimes death seems like a preferable option, a release from the dreadful pain. Granted, the hospital tried to manage the pain for me, but sometimes the pain would override the medications, like a rambunctious wave getting way out of control and shooting above the rocks. Many burns patients don't recover from their injuries. People can die from serious burns, you know. Maybe sometimes they lose the will to live along the way. Who knows? Many times I was drifting on that same boat of hopelessness, wondering whether fighting through the pain and all the disfigurement was actually worth it. But despite everything that happened on that inauspicious night, I wouldn't have changed a thing, even if I could rewind the clock back again. I wish I could have saved my father, though. I wish I'd checked up on him after Hazel left the house that night. Maybe none of this would have happened then. But even if my father had survived, doubtless he would have had dreadful burning. And sometimes in that situation, dying can actually be a gift. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. Who knew that Hazel Montgomery would be so offended with my father breaking up with her that she would return to our house, dousing him with petrol, setting him alight with fire? I still maintain that that has got to be the worst way to die. If you think of the depictions of hell in the Bible, it's described as a pit of fire, not a pit of ice, nor a pit of water or a windstorm or any other hazard like that, because fire is the worst form of eternal punishment. That's why during the 9/11 disaster, people jumped out of burning buildings rather than facing the wrath of the searing, unforgiving heat, the black smoke, the roaring flames. I have an insight of what those people went through. I was able to save Pixie's life, and that dog means the entire world to me. And I wouldn't have been happy living with the guilt of not saving him and saving myself. Pixie knew without a shadow of a doubt that I'd saved his life that night, as dogs are remarkably clever. And let's just say that dog has been a blessing in my lonely life, while I have whiled away the solitary days in my grandmother's apartment. I have always found things to do, like making jams for my grandmother to sell at the farmer's market, and I've been teaching myself to make candles, but life hasn't always been easy, and friends are like a hazy memory from the past. I've run away from that part of my life, retreated into my shell, scurried away to hide in the dark shadows, as that seemed like the best thing to do. All my life I had been pretty. I had no idea what it was like to feel so self-conscious, so conspicuously ugly, that you wanted the ground to swallow you whole. How I wished I could be an invisible man, walking through the people in town, with no one knowing I was there. My grandmother and Sister Ruth were deep sleepers. They were obliviously unaware of my nighttime activities, and I didn't want to inform them of what I got up to at night. I knew my grandmother would lose precious sleep worrying about me, walking around in the dark. I carried a long bag over my shoulders that contained a torch, bear spray, and a flask of hot chocolate. I knew I would go mad cooped up in the house on my own without getting fresh air, so I always looked forward to the early morning hours when the whole world was fast asleep and I could become alive again. On this particular night, it was an ordinary night, much like any other. I instinctively woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, like clockwork. My dog is lying curled up at the foot of my bed. He lifts up his head to look at me briefly, then retracts back to his original position and continues to snore. I rise out of my bed. I slipped quietly down the staircase, past the window that overlooks the street, allowing a generous amount of moonlight to filter into the apartment, so I can see my way clearly down those steps. I creep cautiously into the kitchen to put on the light while I boil a kettle to make myself some hot chocolate in a flask. I quickly pull out my duffel bag that I hide discreetly in the closet in the entrance hall, where I keep my clothes and my bag that I use for my nighttime soirees. I quickly get dressed in the kitchen, throwing my pyjamas into the duffel bag and replacing it in the hallway closet. I fill up my flask with hot chocolate, and then I'm good to go. I quickly open the side door of the kitchen, locking it behind me, slipping the key into my pocket. I glide down the stairwell, and soon I'm on the street below. There is a cool breeze blowing, a soft moonlight filtering through the canopy. It's a gorgeous night. My face is safely buried behind my hoodie. There is not a single soul in sight. I can hear the crickets and frogs. I walk quickly past boutiques, coffee shops, and I cross the long ribbon of asphalt to the wood grove beyond. This is my secret place, the place I like to hang out at night. In the beginning it was daunting walking through the woods at night, but not any more. It's like my eyes have adjusted to the light, grown accustomed to the darkness. I pull away my hoodie to expose my face. I am safe here, as only the animals will see me, and they never notice my unsightly scars. And even if they did, they would never dare pass judgment. Animals don't judge like that. This is what makes them life's little angels. With my torch, I walk through the woods, thoroughly enjoying the feeling of crunching the leaf litter and twigs under the rubber of my boots. I see a few raccoons running past me. They stop for a brief moment to look at me, and we almost exchange hypothetical hellos. When I first used to enter the woodgrove, they would bolt past me in a tearing hurry, but not any more. They've almost acclimatized to my presence. I feel alive walking through the woods, even though everything is shrouded in darkness, and the tall, towering silhouettes of the trees are swallowed up by the dusky haze of this ambiguous twilight, their leafy boughs indeterminate and very vague. The forest is tenebrous, as not much moonlight escapes through the canopy of the trees, but the light of my torch is more than enough, and it navigates the way. I notice that everything has grown eerily quiet, so quiet that you can hear a pin drop. Even the boughs of the trees have stopped jiggling. The cool wind has become subdued, as if repressed by the sombre gloominess of the energy tonight. Even the sounds of the crickets and frogs have grown muted, low-key, and suddenly they stop their trill. It's in this moment that a chill runs down my spine. I've never known the woods to feel as foreboding and bodeful as this, but something is out of sync, out of alignment, so to speak. It feels really off. I also get the sense that I'm being watched. I've had this feeling before when some indigenous nightly animal has bounced out of the shadows, watching me cautiously to ensure that I do not impose a threat. But this is different, very different. Whatever is staring at me from the looming dark shadows possesses a festering, clawing energy that certainly gives me the heebie-jeebies. It's making my skin crawl and telling me to get the hell out of here if I know what's good for me. And that is when I see her. It's a little girl. I'm astonished, as she's no more than 4 or 5 years old. I'm so befuddled to see a little girl in the middle of the woodgrove at night. I'm concerned about her welfare, that I'm not even thinking about my burns or having been seen by someone. I'm troubled about this girl. Who is she? Where are her parents? What is she doing in the middle of the woodgrove at this God-forsaken hour of the early morning? It makes no sense at all. I don't understand this. She's so innocent, so vulnerable. She clearly needs my help. The little girl puts her fingers on her lips and whispers, "They mustn't see us.
They mustn't see us. They mustn't hear us. They mustn't hear us. I'm so confounded, as I don't say a thing. The little girl is beckoning for me to follow her. I should be asking her who she is, what she's doing in the woodgrove, where her parents are. But it's like this little girl has locked me under a beguiling spell. And I follow her, almost like a lamb to the slaughter, as there is something not quite right about her. But it's like I'm magnetically drawn towards her. The next thing I know is I hear these thumping feet moving hastily towards me. But my eyes remain steadily focused on the girl, who continues to beckon to me. Suddenly, a large hand seizes me, and literally is waving thick sausage-sized fingers in front of my eyes, almost as if trying to get me out of a trance-like state. I find myself looking up into the eyes of a massive Bigfoot. I want to scream, but I can't. This thing is gargantuan. I think I'm going to pass out from sheer shock. But when I look into the creature's eyes more intently, I see only kindness and concern within their depths. There are no words to describe this Bigfoot to you other than the fact that he made me feel like a tiny doll. He was so powerfully built, with shoulders that bubbled with muscle. He was covered with long, shaggy hair, and his face was like that of a human, with prominent cheekbones, a flat nose, square jawline, a heavily furrowed brow. He was easily over 8 foot tall, with overlong arms, and a cone-shaped head. He smelt strongly of pine. The creature grabs me by my arm, and walks me hurriedly through the woods, until we're facing the road that overlooks the shopping arcade. I hear in my head, "Not safe, not safe." I look up at the Bigfoot and say, "Why? Who is she? What is she?" "She's not a little girl," the words come into my head. "She's evil. She's trying to destroy you." The moonlight has cascaded onto my face, lighting up the left-hand side of my cheek, and the creature catches sight of my scarring. He stops for a moment, examining my face, looking into my eyes, and I get the sense that he's stepped into my life and is rewinding my life story in his mind. The next thing I know, he's stroking my cheek, marvelling at the pits of my scar. "War wound," he says in my head. "You should be proud of your war wound, for it does not define you. It makes you." And after that, he guides me across the road and watches me walking away. I could see him standing there for a very long time, until he was gone from my sight. I marvelled at what this intelligent Bigfoot had actually spoken to me, how he had intervened to rescue me from a little girl who clearly was not what she appeared to be. But what was she? An evil spirit or something? I thought about the Bigfoot's poignant words he told me, that my wound was something to be proud of, as it made me who I am today. And his words quite literally changed my life, as I realized he was absolutely right. I surprised my sister and my grandmother by going out into the public, and whenever anyone whispered or passed comment, I would say, "You're talking about my scar here, on the left-hand side of my cheek. I got that from my house burning down on fire." And instead of people being mean to me, they gathered around me to hear my story. And I realized that the Bigfoot was right. I should wear my scars with pride. Believe it or not, I'm now a married woman with 3 children of my own. Ironically, I met my husband in a supermarket. He was one of those people staring at my scar for a little bit too long than he should have been. "This old thing," I said to him, "it's a burn I received from escaping a burning house." "Oh, I'm sorry," says the stranger. "I didn't mean to be so rude. I didn't mean to stare. I was just curious about what happened to you. Can I take you for a coffee?" I agreed. I told him my story. He listened to me intently. "Do you mind if I touch your scar? It's quite beautiful, you know. Quite fascinating, really." "Now you are joking," I laugh. "My scar is ugly." The man stroked my scar, and he still does that today. "You are very beautiful, and so is your scar. You should be proud of what it represents. It's a badge of honor that expresses bravery, courage, tenacity." He was seeing my scar in the way that the Bigfoot had done. No wonder I married the man. These days I ask him if he notices my scar at all, and he says no. When he looks at me, he sees me. And now when I look at myself in the mirror, I don't hate what I see anymore.
Quite literally, that Bigfoot brought the shy, retiring, frightened woman out of her shell. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Matthew, but people tend to call me Matt for short. I'm from Grand Junction, which is the largest city in western Colorado that is situated along the Colorado River on the western slope of the Rockies and has become a very popular mountain biking destination, which is well revered for its magnificent panoramic views over large statuesque rocks, some that could be individualistically works of art in their own right, along with, of course, the quintessential Colorado mountains, ridges, canyons, prairies, and mountainous outcrops. I live in the largest neighbourhood here that is known as Spring Valley, in the northernmost part of Grand Junction, that consists of vast open spaces of magnificent green turf, rolling hills, basketball courts, picnic tables and grills, but also is conveniently centrally located with shops, movie theatres and restaurant amenities close by. I grew up in this very open, spacious part of the world with two sisters, Jenny and Carly, and was raised by both my fun-loving, gentle and easygoing parents. We really had a very idyllic, outdoorsy type of life growing up, which incorporated lots of socialising, parties, barbecues, hiking, camping and fishing excursions. I grew up in a very standard-looking ranch-style home with a spacious front and backyard, which I won't describe to you or your listeners because, dare I say, that it was far from exceptional, rather mediocre, bog standard if you like, and run-of-the-mill. You see, both my parents' consummate leanings and accomplished talents were certainly not disposed to the artistic side, so even the decor in our home left much to be desired. It lacked flair, finesse, and of course style. Still, I suppose it served our most immediate needs as a home, but inspirational it most certainly was not. One day my mother invited some relatives of ours for a barbecue at our home, and the day was absolutely amazing with exquisitely beautiful Colorado spring weather, a sumptuous feast of melt-in-the-mouth barbecued chicken, sticky ribs and marinated beef kebabs that were served with mac and cheese and a vast selection of delectable salads, including a firm favourite of mine, feta cheese and watermelon, serenaded by lots of black pepper. I was about 15 at the time and was about to go and play with my friends when I overheard one of the adults talking about an account she'd heard of a killer whale sighting somewhere in Antarctica. I was always fascinated by animals, so I was eager to listen in. It was extraordinary, she told us. The killer whales attacked and killed their fair share of seal pups. They tossed them up in the air like pizza dough in an Italian restaurant, gorging on them in a bloody feast that was hard to watch. When they were no longer hungry, one killer whale, or orc if you like, escorted a live seal pup back to its mother. So you see, not all animals are just vicious killers. They have intelligence and empathy, it would seem. Wow, said my mother, now that is some story. I happen to have a huge appreciation and passion for orcs myself. They're undoubtedly intelligent creatures to show mercy like that. It clearly suggests that they have emotions. Well, they are mammals, said my father reflectively. They should be intelligent. My mother's sister Tabitha looked at my mother and said, "Do you remember the extraordinary account of the Bigfoot that grandfather related to us all those years ago, when the Bigfoot also showed extraordinary mercy to an animal, proving that they are also not just aggressive, treacherous killers?" My mother shook her head. "I don't remember that." "Well, I suppose I was about 15 at the time," reflected my aunt, when he told us the incredible story, which would have made you about 9, I guess. I suppose it's hardly a wonder you don't remember his astounding account, although at the time he had no idea the creature was Bigfoot, because naturally it wasn't documented by science in those days. "Tell us the story," begged my mother. "I want to hear it. We all do." I immediately sat very still as I listened intently to this incredulous, phenomenal story that my aunt unveiled before us, which was like unearthing an amazing secret from a hidden vault that had been cloaked in mystery for a very long time. Suddenly the contents were being revealed to us, and we were the first ears of this generation to hear this remarkable story. It concerned my great-grandfather, and my ears were burning with excitement as I listened to my aunt. I hung on to her every word, and it did not disappoint.
In truth, the story quite literally blew my mind like a stick of dynamite because it was so awe-inspiring. I recently contacted my aunt to recount the story to me again so that I didn't miss any detail. I wanted to share it with you and your listeners. I do not know the exact location of this experience, but it did happen somewhere here in Colorado, which gives you an idea of location geographically, I would hope. So this is the extraordinary story that she shared with me. My grandfather was a remarkable man. Sadly, he passed away over 25 years ago. But he was a very skilled, accomplished hunter and tracker, with a proficient, stupendous reputation for helping hunters retrieve their lost hunting trophies. He recalled multiple occasions to me when a hunter would actually not be able to repossess the deer they shot. They'd be searching for the deer, sometimes even for days after a shooting. Many would leave empty-handed and unrewarded, wondering what on earth had happened to the deer they'd shot. It had mysteriously just disappeared off the face of the earth. As incongruous as it sounds, this does actually happen. In those days, hunters always pursued the deer they killed, in the same way a lion or a tiger would require technique and cunning skill in order to take down its prey. They would locate and stalk the deer with masterful stealth, discretion and efficiency. My grandfather said that this was one of the best ways to take down a sizable buck, because these animals tend to lie down low in the thicket and areas where they're easily concealed and less conspicuous. The deer are naturally intelligent and are well aware of the perilous dangers of hunters, so they instinctively choose to remain invisible and out of plain sight. There was none of this sitting and hiding out in a deer stand waiting for the animal to come to you. As my grandfather would say, that was the worst way to hunt for a sizable deer. Instead, they'd find out where the deer were congregating and pursue them that way, sometimes even for days. Of course, things were a lot different in those days, as they didn't have easy access to cell phones, which makes all the difference today. My grandfather would invariably receive a call from a hunter once he'd returned home from the hunt, begging him to help them retrieve a lost deer for them that they were unable to detect. "I know I shot him," they would say to my grandfather, whose name was Cliff. "It should be dead," they continued. "It was such a clean shot, but it has seemingly vanished into thin air. Where on earth could it have got to?" they would chide. My grandfather owned 2 female German shepherds that he had raised from very young and trained to pick up a blood trail, called Dolly and Missy, and they were brilliant at recovering dead deers that hunters could not find after an intrepid, valiant hunting excursion that required deep concentration, furtive stealth and masterful skill. Losing a deer after shooting, as strange as it sounds, is not uncommon as you may think, believe me. The blood trail of a dead animal is significantly stronger than that of an injured one, so both dogs were very efficient in assisting my grandfather in recovering a dead or injured deer. Their advanced sense of smell was a prerequisite for the job at hand, because it assisted my grandfather to detect the animal much more efficiently. You see, as humans we are limited to only 6 million olfactory receptors, while dogs have 300 million, and their nasal tissue is 30 times larger than ours, so dogs rarely can pick up smells that we cannot even detect, so they are invaluable as an asset for a tracker, and my grandfather would never work without them. He would attach a harness to his dogs as he followed their lead, and would always observe his dog actually evaluating in their mind what was the best route to take to retrieve the deer. Even for a dog, thinking was always involved in the recovery of an absconding deer, almost every time. If the injured deer was found lying in the brush, my grandfather would always alleviate its pain and suffering by swiftly taking it out of its misery with a single gunshot. It's not ethical to leave an animal to suffer, which was another reason my grandfather's help was so fundamental for the hunters. Many of them killed to eat to provide food for their families, and not just for sport, and they were exceedingly compassionate about the welfare of wild animals, which of course is a hallmark for being human. He would say that many hunters believed that they'd shot a deer dead but had actually been deceived or tricked by their own eyes, in falsely assuming this to be the case, when in fact the animal had not succumbed to a deadly fate at all, and was happily frolicking away in an open meadow or prairie or woodland area. Believe me, this happens more frequently than you know, so our eyes are sadly not our sharpest tool. My grandfather would joke that we probably needed to borrow a pair of eyes from a golden eagle because then we would rarely see well. Also, there were times when deer survived their injuries long after they were actually shot, sometimes going on to make an extraordinary recovery, with miraculous outcomes, going on to lead normal lives. There was one occasion that a deer was taken down by a hunter, and after his hunt, imagine his amazement to discover that the animal had been shot in the liver 2 months prior on an earlier deer hunt. The animal should have died, but it didn't. He discovered this when butchering the animal open, where he uncovered what should have been a lethal bullet hole in the deer's liver. The liver had begun to regenerate itself quite efficiently and heal over, and was functioning very well. It could have ended up living a normal life had it not succumbed to its deadly fate. Even the interior and exterior entrance wounds had healed over completely. They were virtually invisible. There was a noted dead area of blackened tissue around the bullet hole, but the body appeared to be eliminating the dead tissue, seemingly sloughing it away, much like the skin cells on our face. It would seem that the deer was in remarkably good health. These strange anomalies can happen from time to time, and are miraculous, reflecting how phenomenal the body is in enabling itself to self-heal, for animals and humans alike. My grandfather would say that deers have an incredible survival instinct, and hunters should always wait for the animal to drop down dead before running after it immediately, because an injured deer that is being pursued can even amble up mountainous ridges and get into awkward, tight, concealed places where it would be challenging to retrieve the dead animal. The deer would seemingly vanish and would invariably end up being eaten by coyotes or wolves, never to be found or retrieved by the hunter again. One day in 1966, my grandfather got a call from an elk hunter who'd only just taken down a large cow when he had intended to hit the bull that was standing by her side. It would seem that his bullet ricocheted and had hit the cow instead of the bull with a lethal blow. The hunter had scanned the whole area, following the trail and droplets of blood, but he couldn't find anything. He had, however, smelt another smell, which he described as rather sweaty and astringent, that was lingering in the air in the aftermath of the hunt. He described this pungent smell as very unpleasant, but could not fathom what it could be, and was rather flummoxed as to its origins, for indeed a smell like that, with sulphurous undertones, he had never discerned before. He was perturbed and perplexed because the cow had been accompanied by a young calf, and now he was certain that the little calf was orphaned, and was very worried about the welfare of the little mite. My grandfather was given the coordinates and location of the hunt, and assured the hunter that he would do his level best to locate the dead elk, and find the missing calf, of course, if that was possible. Before long, my grandfather ventured to the area where he believed the cow had been shot down only minutes before. He observed the first signs of the bloody trail. Luckily it was the monsoon season, which runs from June to September, with seasonal wind shifts that bring streams of moisture from the Gulf of California, and so the previous 3 days this dry region had been assaulted by a barrage of heavy persistent rainfall, and some of the ground had become soft and moist, which was advantageous for discerning tracks. He noticed everything had responded to the rain, as the vegetation was now thriving vigorously, and the prairie was covered in long, sumptuous green grass, several inches tall. My grandfather followed the bloody trail, where he deciphered 2 lone sets of deer tracks, one belonging to the cow and the other to a calf, but both tracks came to a very sudden dead end. You would be forgiven for believing that the cow and the calf had seemingly disappeared into thin air, vanishing like a ghost, never to be seen or heard from again. Yet clearly that had not happened, as sometimes a cow can actually jump to the side to take cover behind a tree trunk, which could explain the dead end. But this had not transpired on this occasion. No wonder the hunter had called him frantically and asked him to get to his hunting location fast to try and at least rescue the little calf. He said his children were willing to raise the calf, as his own family loved rescuing orphaned animals from raccoons to deers on many occasions, and had successfully returned them to the wild. My grandfather discovered another print that appeared after the deer prints, but this was a print he did not recognise at all, and left him very bewildered. What on earth could it be? It was a humanoid footprint that was certainly not human, given its monstrous size, and the very fact that the big toe was splayed to the left, that meant that this humanoid had never ever worn shoes a day in his life, and that was clearly apparent to my grandfather. Now, you don't get people who don't wear shoes, nor do you get people with feet this large. The footprint measured 17 inches and was exceedingly big. My grandfather knew that it couldn't be a bear print because he was indeed familiar with all such tracks in the wilderness, but the likes of these he had never discerned before. My grandfather said that his dog seemed perturbed and confused when they reached the end of the bloody trail, but German shepherds are exceedingly clever, and Dolly appeared to be thinking as she seemed to be connecting the dots of the missing cow to the strange new scent that she had uncovered at the end of the trail. And she appreciated that both scents were unequivocally linked, so she embarked on the decision to follow the new rather peculiar scent with the belief that it would ultimately lead to the original trail. My grandfather said that Dolly had figured out the new scent would lead them to the missing cow, and she was absolutely right, of course. But they were about to uncover something that would change my grandfather's view of the natural world forthwith. What he was to uncover would give him an unwavering revelation that humans cannot comprehend the depth of the vast scale of mysteries that lurk in the wilderness areas of Northern America. Many of these remote locations are veiled and steeped in mystery as they have never been scouted or explored before by man. He ascertained that even some species considered extinct today may still be living in our forests, and he was not dismissive of this distinct possibility. Before long, my grandfather followed Dolly and Missy's trail as they traced this mysterious new scent with a robust enthusiasm that got stronger as they rambled towards an open prairie that was dotted with many elks, many of them cows with their calves. My grandfather stopped dead in his tracks, instructing both Missy and Dolly to get down and to stay very still, of which they did, flattering out their long bodies on the ground and remaining very quiet, as they were always desirous to obey my grandfather's command. My grandfather's skilled eyes scanned the rugged terrain, and he could see something moving behind the large trees that flanked the prairie. Whatever it was, it appeared to be Herculean in size, and seemed to possess a dark, shadowy, humanoid silhouette. Trembling with excitement, my grandfather tried to steady himself as he focused in on the creature with his binoculars. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Standing there between the tree line was this huge humanoid ape-like form that appeared to be holding the living baby calf in his large humanoid hands, with fingers as large as sausages. If that wasn't strange enough, the critter appeared to be stroking the tiny calf with his huge fingers like a puppy, as if he was trying to reassure it. It appeared that the critter's dark eyes were pinned on the grazing elks in the prairie, who had not been alerted to his presence. This alone was peculiar, because my grandfather ascertained that the acetone-like smell emanating from the critter was easily distinguishable. Perhaps it was a smell that they were well acquainted with by now. Could it be that the gentle breeze was blowing in the opposite direction? My grandfather studied the creature curiously and was bedazzled and beguiled by what he was seeing, as the critter was like a humanoid giant with ape-like characteristics and influences. It was absolutely colossal and gargantuan. My grandfather calculated the creature's height, based on the size of the branch as a measuring reference, that this creature was henceforth at the very least 10 foot tall and covered in long flowing hazelnut hair that appeared a little tangled and rather matted. He described the critter as having very muscular overlong arms and powerful defined legs, with enormous hands and feet. Its excessively broad shoulders seemed to taper down to a lean narrow waist and a flashboard-like stomach. It was like a V-shape. The body was long and exceedingly sinewy, with superb muscle tone and enviable lean muscle mass. When my grandfather focused on the critter, his powerful lens noted that the head was shaped like a bullet and had a very long angular face, leathery brown tan-like skin that possessed an excessively wrinkled brow ridge, a flat nose, deep-set, very intelligent dark eyes, and a slender-looking mouth. My grandfather was shaking violently by this stage because he could not believe the strange anomaly of such a creature existing in our reality. Suddenly his attention was drawn to the dead mother cow that the hunter had killed accidentally. It was lying sprawled across on a high tree branch, where it dangled precariously, with its limp head facing the ground and its fixed glazed eyes staring into space, with still dark, motionless eyes that seemed frozen in death. My grandfather watched the hairy humanoid as it continued to stroke the calf, and he noticed the creature had tied a vine leaf around the calf's neck, rather like a necklace. On reflection, this must have been used as some kind of a marker to identify the creature in the short term. Suddenly a mother cow and her calf moved ever closer to the hairy humanoid, grazing on the luscious green turf and oblivious to the humanoid's presence. Then something rather extraordinary happened. The big hairy critter pushed the little fawn towards the mother cow, and to my grandfather's amazement, the fawn scampered over to the cow and began suckling its teats. The cow was quite happy to offer her teats to this hungry calf, not remotely concerned about sharing her milk, and it seemed that the mother's own calf also accepted this newly adopted friend. My grandfather remembers being so impressed with the intelligence of this incredulous creature, whom it showed so much compassion, discernment, and ingenuity in placing a calf with another mother for sustenance, and he had retrieved the dead body of the cow to eat, but was very concerned for the welfare of the calf. My grandfather said he obviously knew that elk often do nurse other calves, and he had observed this himself firsthand on multiple occasions when a mother elk appeared to be nursing 4 calves, some clearly that were not her own. For a long time my grandfather marvelled at what he'd seen and spoke of the event to no one, because he didn't believe anyone could conceive such a seemingly fictitious account to be remotely credible. My grandfather did go back to the area where he saw the critter a day or so later and observed that the calf was very much alive and well because of the vine necklace around its neck, which clearly distinguished him from the other calves that all looked very much alike. The vine necklace would ultimately die and break off, but it proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the orphaned calf had indeed been accepted by the mother elk and was now suckling. It was frolicking happily with the other calves and seemed blissfully happy and obliviously unaware of how close it came to losing its life that day. My grandfather observed no more sightings of the critter that he had encountered, who he believed was exceedingly elusive. He marvelled at a critter like this existing in Colorado, and for many years pondered over what it was that he had seen that fateful, extraordinary and wonderful day when Mother Nature revealed to him the sheer depth of her mercy. We know, of course, now that what he saw was a Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, the torrential rain was pouring down outside in our yard, covering everything in gushing streams of water, so that the foliage of the trees and plants almost glittered and sparkled with droplets of water. It was as if all the dust had been washed away, and the plants had been perfectly polished. Everything seemed so fresh, so clean after a rain shower. The ground hungrily soaked up this downpour with a magnanimous appreciation. Even after the rains, I would marvel how luxuriously green the turf would become, how the flowers and plants responded to the soaking rain by bursting into fragrant blossom and growing so much more vigorously. The rain always had a positive, ebullient effect on my mood. I know for many people rain showers might positively be irritating, miserable even, but not for me, never for me. My sister Jennifer was a year older than me. She would always say that Mother Earth was crying as she was so desperately sad when it rained, but I did not agree, for these streaming tears were very good. I stared out of the window for a second, watching the rain, mesmerised by it, listening to its punnelling sounds as it beat against the roof and splashed against the windows, the droplets of water trickling down the glass pane like sorrowful raindrops. My mother was observing me. She was smiling warmly at me. "What are you like, Hamish? You do amuse me. You and the drenching rain. You have such a fascination for it, don't you, dear? If I didn't know any better, I'd say you'd become a meteorologist later on in life." "What's a meteorologist, ma'am, I ask?" "Well, it's a person that forecasts the weather. You can even call the weatherman that you see on TV a meteorologist, especially those doing their television reports, standing out in the open, courageously braving the elements, decked to the nines in their waterproof Macs or windbreakers, reporting about major hurricanes, tornadoes or storms that know no mercy or consideration to the inhabitants of a town or city, let me tell you." "Are you kidding me, Mum? I love the rain, but not that much. I hardly think I'm the type to want to stand in the eye of the storm, reporting about the weather and being beaten by those aggressive punnelling winds. No, thank you very much." My mother giggles. I can just see you there on the television saying,
"Folks, it's not too bad, really, I assure you."
And then the next bit of television footage shows you being blown over by the wind, stumbling over on your feet, reassuring the viewers,
"Oh, that was just a little gust of wind, folks. Nothing to worry about at all."
My sister was sitting at the desk in the living room, studiously doing her homework. She roars with laughter as she looks up at us. "You're right, Mummy. I can imagine Hamish reporting about the weather, pretending all was well, but hanging on for dear life to a telephone pole as the wind almost carries him off in the wind, but still saying defiantly to the camera,
'Folks, it's not as bad as it looks. It could be worse.'
It's the sort of thing that Hamish would definitely do. Why's everybody making fun of me today?" I say, looking from my mother to my sister, who are twinkling with amusement at the very idea of me presenting the weather to an audience of North American viewers, while being subjected to tumultuous weather conditions and blasting wind. They love the idea of that. "No, we're not, Hamish," said my mother affectionately, giving me a nudge. "Why can't we tease you? We're only having a bit of fun." I was watching the rain with my knees on the settee, glancing out through our large glass windows that overlooked the green turf of our front yard, the street, and the long grey ribbon of asphalt. Our two beloved King Charles spaniels, Bouncer and Bo Peep, were standing on the couch next to me, looking out through the window. In a trice they began to bark excitedly, wagging their tails at something that I hadn't seen. And that was when I heard the sound of footsteps, the rattle of the postbox as the letters crashed onto the carpet with a loud thump, and I could see the postman wearing a blue mac, pulling his hoodie over his head as he hurriedly dashed down our drive, while the rain continued to beat down. Our two dogs dutifully scrambled to the entrance hall to collect the post in their jaws, which they obediently dropped at my mother's feet, a trick they'd learnt from my father. They also ran down the drive on a Sunday morning to collect the papers for my father, but sometimes their teeth did manage to pierce the paper, which was rather unfortunate. "Very good girl, very good boy," says my mother, patting the dogs, giving them both a biscuit, as she retrieves the mail and plops it on the desk next to my sister. "I'll look at that later. It looks like a bunch of bills and advertising for double glazing. Why can't we ever get anything exciting in the post these days? In my day, the post was actually exciting. Not anymore." My mother retreated into the kitchen, returning to the living room with a bowl full of buttered breadcrumbs. She pulled back the sliding doors that led onto our wraparound porch and ambled down the short line of steps to the lawn. She wasn't bothered by the interminable rain that was punneling down harder than ever before, with no promise of a reprieve in sight. I watched her throw out the breadcrumbs, tossing them generously everywhere she could. In what seemed like seconds, the lawn was covered with hundreds of our feathery friends. My mother always solicitously thought about the birds when the weather was cold and wet, and then she would dutifully throw out breadcrumbs for them, no matter how chaotic her own personal schedule was. The birds were appreciative, as they were right now, hungrily filling their beaks with crumbs. Our yard was covered with sparrows, finches, chickadees, and nuthatches. They were such a pleasure to watch. The quintessential cat TV. But our cat Wallace was lying on one of the other sofas, not budging from his cosy retreat. But when he did hear the tweeting sounds, he sat up at once, taking notice. Then, true to form, his instincts rolled into motion, and with curious ears perked forward, he gracefully padded over to the window ledge and buoyantly bounced onto the sill. Wallace was spellbound, glued to the spot, his tail twitching, his face animated, watching the birds, and he made a funny sound at the back of his throat that made us all laugh. I'm sure Wallace would have liked nothing better than to stalk those birds, but he knew better than to get soaked to the skin. Wallace loathed getting his coat wet. I'll never forget the time he accidentally jumped into the bath, not knowing it was full of water. Luckily the water was cold. Boy, did that cat get the shock of his life, emerging from the bath looking like a drenched rat. That's the closest that poor Wallace ever came to having a full-on wash, and never again. Wallace loathed water. My mother came back into the house, wiping down her blue and white check dress, while drying the long strands of her dark brown sopping hair with a towel. Oh dear, look at me. I got quite drenched. I'm soaked to the skin. But sometimes you have to defy the elements for the good of the wildlife, don't you? I think we should always play our part in helping nature. I mean, those birds have a hard enough life fending for themselves anyway. I imagine it's not easy for them. Me and my family lived in a green leafy neighbourhood in Portland, where most of the detached houses had their own front and back yards. The street was elegantly lined with a statuesque, rather showy selection of honey locust trees. The convivial, friendly neighbourhood was pleasant, and many of the people here knew each other and were on first-name terms. But even if they didn't, people would give you that quintessential friendly nod when they crossed your path. I considered our house one of the prettiest houses in the street. I'm not being biased, it really was. My mother fastidiously attended to the front yard, with the same loving care she showered on the birds. I had even caught her talking to the plants once. She insisted that if you talked to the plants, they would respond to you. I didn't believe her at first, but she potted up 2 plants once to demonstrate this fact to me. She spoke to one, and the other she did not. And sure enough, the one she spoke to tripled and quadrupled in size, and was covered in an abundance of blooms, while the other pot plant looked rather bedraggled and sorry for itself. My father described my mother as having green fingers, so our house had oodles of curb appeal, with a neat manicured hedge that fringed the front yard, flower pots and beds ablaze with colourful perennials in summer and spring. Our house was 80 years old, but it was a classic style that was timeless and would have fitted on any street, in any generation, any time, in any period of history, and not look out of place. My mother believed in investing in traditional, classic, timeless architecture, as it never dates. She claimed if you brought some ultra-modern house, within no time at all it would become dated, when new innovative architecture styles come along to steal their thunder. I knew she was right. My father worked during the day in downtown Portland, in a world where everything revolved around numbers, figures, overheads, stuff like that. I knew I'd never follow in his footsteps, as math was my least favourite subject at school. I found it tediously boring. I was much more inclined to like English, history and the arts. I also thoroughly enjoyed sport. "Mum," I say, looking up at her earnestly when she comes in from feeding the birds with her bowl now empty. "I think Robert is a thief. I'm sure he's stolen stuff of mine." My mother looks aghast at my sudden confession. "Why are you telling me this now? What a strange thing to say, sweetheart. Are you sure? You must be careful making allegations like that. You can't just accuse someone for no reason at all. He seems like such a nice boy. His parents are always delightful. We've known him for years. I'm sure you're wrong, dear. Maybe you've misplaced the item. It can easily happen, you know." "Mum, I wish you'd listen to me. I promise you, Robert is definitely stealing stuff of mine. After we've been playing together in my bedroom, sometimes stuff just mysteriously goes missing. It can't be a coincidence. Daddy says that there's no such thing as coincidence." Robert lived in our neighbourhood, several houses down from us, in a rather ugly-looking bungalow, which had a dark, oppressive look about it, with windows shaped like eyes. I'd never seen a house like that before. It was also dark and dingy on the inside, decorated with Gothic furniture, and his mother wasn't the greatest housekeeper, so there was always cobwebs floating all over the place. I don't think his mother was acquainted with a duster. Sometimes I would cough and splutter in the house from all the congealed dust. Over the years, me and Robert had become the best of friends. We'd often cycle around the neighbourhood together and spend our time playing all kinds of computer games. It seemed nonsensical that he would steal from me, but every time he left my house without fail, something seemed to have gone missing, and it was always something he'd shown a fleeting interest in only moments before, like great-looking marbles or a model car, even a nice sweatshirt, sneakers, jackets, stuff like that. Sometimes my stuff would disappear and then miraculously reappear months later, possibly when he got bored of it, or it had become so worn out it was struggling to hold itself together. I would find the mysterious, paradoxical disappearance of my things very upsetting, and would search high and low for the missing item, wondering how something could nebulously, just wondrously grow legs and walk off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. I'd find myself second-guessing myself, thinking that I just had to be losing my mind. But there was definitely something schemy, sneaky, and cunningly disingenuous about my best friend. I guess I'd always known that, but I really didn't want to admit it to myself. When I went to play over at his house, he was always lying to his mother, with a bare-faced audaciousness. In truth, at first I clandestinely admired the brass nerve of his brazen audacity. You see, I would never have had the courage to lie to my mother, in the masterfully underhanded, manipulative way that he did. I remember once his mother asked what had happened to the last 2 cheesecakes that were left in the refrigerator, that she and her husband were planning to enjoy to celebrate their wedding anniversary later that evening. Me and Robert had eaten the cheesecakes only moments before. I would hedge a bet. If his mother had looked close enough, she might have spotted some telltale crumbs on the sides of our lips. He looked at his mother with an unabashful straight face, as if butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, and would say artfully, "Mum, I saw you eating the cheesecakes earlier on. You ate both of them." She would look at her son and say, "No, I didn't. I couldn't eat 2 cheesecakes all to myself. That would make me very sick. I would remember doing that. Besides, I'm watching my weight." "No, she did eat the 2 cheesecakes, didn't she, Hamish? We both saw her eating the cheesecakes," he would say, looking at me shamelessly. I would shrug my shoulders in a nonchalant way and say, "I can't remember." It was easier that way. Mrs. Barker would say, oh dear, I must be losing my mind. I mean, I bought those cheesecakes for dinner tonight to celebrate our anniversary, and you're telling me I ate them? I have no memory of that at all. I must be going completely mad." Needless to say, my little mischievous, iniquitous friend made his own mother doubt herself, which was a rarely cruel thing to do. There must have been times when she seriously wondered if she was developing dementia, thanks to him. If money went missing from her purse, or a jar of peanut butter, she began to think she must have had less money in her purse, and perhaps she had imagined buying the peanut butter at the store. Never once did she doubt her son's integrity. She had so much faith in him. Another time we accidentally blasted one of her windows when playing with a soccer ball in the front yard. The ball went crashing through the glass pane into her living room, smashing the glass into smithereens. His mother came darting out to see who the mysterious offender actually was. But by then Robert had seized me, to hide me behind the shed, so that his mother wouldn't know it was us. Robert blamed it on the next-door neighbours' kids, claiming they were the guilty party, and his mother believed him. "Oh, I saw them, Mum. They were playing ball on our street, right next to our house. I saw them hit the window, and both me and Hamish ran after them, but they denied everything. They lied to us, but we saw them, didn't we?" Oh dear, said his mother. "Well, I suppose accidents do fortuitously happen, but I do wish those children would play ball outside their own house, not mine." "Why won't you tell her the truth, Robert?" I would say to my friend. "Would it hurt to be honest?" As to which he answered, "I don't want to get into trouble, do I?" But I very much doubt his mother would have been that angry with him, beyond giving him a stern telling off. He certainly didn't come from an abusive family, so there was no reason to cover himself with lies for self-protection. It was like Robert just lied for the hell of it, and I really didn't like that about him. One day when Robert was around at my house, soon after my birthday, we were playing with my birthday present, a model RC plane that you could fly in the air with a remote control. You know the sort of thing. It had cost an absolute fortune. I had been begging my parents to buy me this aircraft for my birthday, but my mother had firmly told me, in no uncertain terms, that it was far too expensive. So when I opened it up, on the bed, surrounded by my parents and my sister, I was absolutely stunned. I think my family was completely delighted by my startled, shocked, elated and bemused reaction. In truth, I was expecting it to be a simple game or something, but not the model aircraft I'd been dreaming about for ages. One of the ladies in our school lift club told me that if I really wanted something badly enough, I should think about it long enough for it to manifest in my reality, that I would attract it to myself. She told me that this was based on the law of attraction, so I listened to her advice, and it had worked. I was now staring at the fruit of my visualization that had masterfully manifested itself in my life. It was nothing short of a miracle.
I don't understand, Mummy. I thought you said the plane was too expensive.
Well, son, said my father, looking at my animated face with a huge grin, sometimes it's worth spending good money on your kids. And you deserve it, son. You're a good kid. I'm proud of you. It's a pleasure to spoil you from time to time. We knew you really wanted this model aircraft, so maybe you'll finally shut up talking about it, he teased.
Thanks, Dad. Thanks, Mum,
I'd said, giving them a huge hug.
Thanks, Sis.
Well, I also told Mum and Dad that they should buy the plane for you, she boasted proudly, 'cause you always work hard when you come home from school, and you help Mum put the dishes in the dishwasher after dinner. I was so thankful that my family had stepped out of a limb to buy me this amazing gift, and I couldn't wait to tell Robert about it. At school that day, I was telling Robert about my incredible plane.
I can't wait to fly it. It's the coolest present that I've ever been given. You should come home with me today. Mum's got birthday cake and she's making burgers and chips for lunch. And then afterwards we can play with my plane.
You can count me in, said Robert enthusiastically.
I won't turn down a plate of burger and chips. Your mum makes the best I've ever tasted.
That afternoon, Robert had his school satchel with him as he returned home with me that day. At a guess, I was 10 at the time. I'm now 25, so that was a good 15 years ago. I was so excited to show him my aircraft after we ate our burgers, followed by birthday cake that was shaped into an aeroplane, of which we greedily ate huge slices dribbling with grey icing.
Come and see what I got for my birthday,
I told Robert excitedly, guiding him into my bedroom and opening up the cardboard box to pull out the plane and its controls. I remember Robert was speechless, or dumbstruck might be a more appropriate word to actually use. He went quite literally green at the gills. The model aircraft had cost a fortune, but I'll never forget the jealousy on his face. Robert could not hide it even from me. I watched him examining the aircraft with an expression of unsullied awe on his face. I could see him gliding his fingers down the craft as he stroked the model aircraft lovingly in his hands like a cat, and he looked up at me and said,
"When I'm older, I'm going to be a pilot, you know."
I looked at him incredulously. I'd never expected him to say that, not for even a moment.
You never told me that. You never asked, but since I was little, it's always been my big dream.
Why? I asked him.
'Cause I've always wanted to fly like a bird, and since I can't be a bird, I'll have to be a pilot. It's the next best thing.
When we went to play with the model RC aircraft out of doors, we watched it whizzing in the air, being guided by our controls. I could see his face light up, like the Christmas lights at the ship parade in Portland, when the ships are illuminated with hundreds of lights here. I've never ever seen anyone more enamoured, more captivated by my present than he actually was. The trouble was, it wasn't his present, but it was obvious he would have liked nothing better than to own it. Needless to say, we played with the plane for ages, our faces glowing with pleasure from the fun we'd had. Finally, I put the plane in the cardboard box, replacing it in the large storage drawer underneath my bed. And the following day, when I went to remove my plane from the box, it was gone. I was gutted. I felt as if I'd been smashed across the head with a bucket of ice-cold water. This wasn't even funny. I was filled with an uneasy feeling about all this. I knew at once that Robert had taken my plane, and I was so furious that I phoned him at once, demanding he gave it back to me. But as I could have predicted, Robert refused to acknowledge he had stolen my aircraft, and much like he did with his mother, he almost succeeded in making me doubt myself. He was very good at that.
"I want my model aircraft back, Robert," I tell him on the phone. "This isn't funny. You've stolen it from me, and you better give it back or else." "How can you say that, Hamish? I'd never steal anything from you. That would be ridiculous. You're my best friend. I can't believe you would think so badly of me. I liked your plane, true enough, but I would never steal such a treasure from you. I know how much it means to you. I'm so hurt that you would have such a low opinion of me. You must have misplaced your plane. Maybe you forgot where you put it last, but I didn't take it. I'm sorry you've lost it, I really am, but it's not my fault. Well, explain to me, Robert, why you're the last person to play with my plane, and now it's conveniently missing. The coincidence is remarkable. And don't you remember you went back to the bedroom to say that you'd left behind a textbook? Were you really just taking my craft and stuffing it in your satchel? That's what you did, didn't you? Don't be like that, Hamish. Are you calling me a thief? I'd never ever take your plane. In fact, I don't need to listen to this. This is crazy. You can't speak to me like this. Robert, you always lie to your mother about everything. You make her think she's going crazy. Why should I believe what you're telling me is true about my plane? I might lie to my mother, Hamish, but I would never, ever lie to you. You're my very best friend, and best friends don't lie to each other. I'm sorry, Robert, you're right. I must have mislaid my plane. I better have a better look for it. What was I thinking? You're my best friend. You'd never steal from me. Suffice to say, I knew Robert had stolen my plane. I was an idiot, and I knew I would never ever invite him back to my home again, not with his light fingers. But he was still my best friend, despite everything, and I valued our friendship more than my plane. I would play with him on the street or at his home, but I would never ever let him come back to my house again. It wasn't worth the risk, as it seemed he had sticky fingers. I was so hurt he'd stolen my plane from me. But I didn't have the heart to tell my parents about what had happened. Besides, my mother refused to believe that Robert was capable of such duplicity. But I clandestinely shared what had happened with my sister Jennifer. I needed to share my angst with someone, and I knew Jennifer would be sympathetic. Even though she was only a year older than I was, she had a sagacious, rather savvy head on her shoulders, and was always able to think outside the box and find a solution to a problem. But I had no comprehension how out there her suggestion would actually be. What? He stole your plane? You kidding me? That's disgusting. You know how expensive that thing was. Our parents spent a fortune buying it for you. How could Robert do such a horrible thing to you? Isn't he supposed to be your best friend? I thought so, but some best friend he's turning out to be. I can't understand why he took my plane like that when he knew how much it meant to me. I'd been talking about it for weeks to him. I always thought he was a sleazeball, says my sister. You've got to get that plane back. How? There's no easy way to get it back. Put it this way, even if I do manage to get into his bedroom, he'd have hidden it somewhere that I'd never be able to find it. Besides, he'll be there with me. If I go snooping through his stuff, looking through closets, he'll know exactly what I'm up to. I think he knows that I know he took my plane anyway. Either that, or he's completely stupid. Maybe he doesn't care. People like that often don't. My guess is he wanted that plane more than he cared about your friendship. Did you not say that his family was going away during the long weekend? We could break in to their house while they're away. Are there any windows we could actually climb through in his home? Sis, are you being serious? We can't break into their house like that. I can't do that. It's illegal. Well, have you got any better suggestions? Says my sister, staring at me defiantly through her earnest blue eyes. The question is, Hamish, how much do you actually want to get your plane back? It's not like we're doing anything wrong. Well, not really. We're righting a wrong, removing something from his house that belongs to you. If we don't do this, you can say goodbye to your plane forever, 'cause you ain't going to ever get it back. But what if Robert knows I broke into his house to get my plane back? Well, if he denied ever taking it, he's hardly going to phone you up and complain that you stole your plane back, because then he has to admit he stole it in the first place. So did you say there are any windows we could break into? No, their windows are shaped like eyes, so we won't be able to access them. But the family do have keys for the sliding door. I know where they keep the spare. I could steal the spare key. How will we be able to break into their house during the day, though? People on the street walk around that area. We would look very suspicious, don't you think? We won't break in during the day, silly. We'll creep out between 1 and 2 in the morning. By then, everybody in the street will be fast asleep. Are you up to it, Hamish? I don't want you chickening out on me at the last minute. She pauses for a moment. That reminds me. Do they have a security alarm system or not? No, they don't. They were thinking about getting one, but they haven't got around to it yet. Whew, that's a relief then. Good, well, we're going to have to get that sliding door spare key. Well, you're going to have to get it, and then we're going to be good to go. But it's up to you to get the key, or otherwise this plan is just not going to work for us, is it?
And so it was on a fine summer's night, when the temperature in Portland was pleasingly pleasant. I'd fallen blissfully fast asleep, knowing full well that in a few hours I'd be woken up by my dutiful sister. My sister was determined to get my plane back. She felt exceedingly aggrieved that it had been stolen from me, but I still felt apprehensive about the idea of breaking into Robert's house, even when his family was away. But my sister was right. If I wanted my RC plane back, this was the only way it could be done. I had gone to bed in my clothes that night, so that when she woke me up, I would only need to put on my trainers, and I'd be good to go. When my sister shakes me wide awake, I began to grumble, as I'm locked in a pleasing dream, and I really don't fancy getting up now. My sister is tenacious, and continues to shake me.
Honestly, Hamish, wake up! If you want your plane back, this is our only opportunity to get it back for you. It's now or never. I sit up in my bed, wiping the cobwebs of sleep away from my eyes, and yawning. What time is it, sis? It's 1:30 in the morning. The street is quiet. I've looked outside. Mum and Dad are fast asleep in their bedroom. Their door is closed, but the dogs are in there, and I can hear snoring. But we've got to be very quiet. We don't want our dogs to wake up and start barking. You know what they can be like. If Mum and Dad hear us slipping out of the house, they'll do their nut. Me and my sister walked down the sweeping staircase in our socks, carrying our sneakers in our hands to avoid causing any squeaking sounds on the landing to arouse my parents' attention. The night light is always left on in the passage so we can see our way clearly. Finally, we're in the kitchen, putting on our sneakers. Then we slip through the back kitchen door, which groans in protest as it squeaks open. We lock the kitchen door behind us, leaving the key under a terracotta pot filled with basil. Finally, we're in the front yard with our torches, hurriedly ambling towards the street. The night is swathed in a deep veil of darkness, as the honey locust trees and vegetation on people's properties appears ambiguously obscure, as their dense forms seem so shadowy, so faint, so out of focus, swallowed magnanimously by the hungry darkness. The soft luminescent moonlight has generously cast a peppering of shadows across the street that bathes the long ribbon of asphalt and the houses in an ethereal light, while the velvety sky is dappled with twinkling stars. The night is surprisingly cool, with a gentle breeze blowing. I'm now wishing I was wearing something a little warmer. Still, it can't be helped. I'm certainly not going back now that we've come this far. I notice the street is so hushed. Even the wind is muted. There are no sounds from crickets, apart from the sound of our sneakers squeaking across the pavement. It's all we can hear are the sounds of our shoes, which is really quite eerie. My sister and I are like two dark shadows slipping into the night. I suddenly feel this huge sense of exhilaration, as all my reservations of what we are doing have abandoned me. For some reason, being up and about without anyone around seems rather exciting. We amble down the street and hear the clattering of someone's bin, as we see two raccoons dashing across our path, eyeing us curiously and scampering away with lightning speed. Before long, we're at Robert's family home. My heart is thundering in my chest as me and my sister disappear into the backyard, and we're now tiptoeing on the porch steps towards the sliding door, and I pull out the key from my pocket. I can't believe how easy this is. It's almost too easy. My sister was absolutely right. This is a flawless plan. All we need to worry about now is finding my aeroplane. I plunder the lock with the key and roll back the door. It slides open. We slip into the house like furtive burglars. It feels amazingly good. Don't put any lights on, my sister warns me. We don't want anybody to notice any lights on in the house. We'll put the light on in Robert's room once we've closed the curtains behind us. My sister uses her torch to navigate her way through the house,
that is bathed in a thick blanket of black. And without that torch, you wouldn't see a single thing, not even your hand in front of your face. It's much darker on the inside of this house than on the outside, and it doesn't help that the decor is all so gothic. Once we reach Robert's room, we draw the curtains behind us and switch on the light. The light almost blinds us, as it's so incredibly bright. We begin to search frantically, looking through Robert's things in his wardrobe. I find a couple of my sweaters, a jacket, some sneakers, but I can't find my plane anywhere.
"It's not here! I can't find it anywhere!"
I say to my sister, hardly daring to believe we'd come so close, and now we were going to return home empty-handed. I could hardly bear the bitter disappointment. My hopes were crushed, and my former ebullience had dissipated, like the air from a punctured beach ball.
"We're not going anywhere until we find it. You hear me?"
says my unwavering, pertinacious sister, looking all the more stout-hearted and intransigent.
"You've got to think. Where would you hide something you don't want somebody else to find?"
"What's wrong?" asks my sister.
"Why are you grimacing? You look so downcast, as if the whole world has fallen on your shoulders. What's up?" "I'm just thinking he could have taken the plane on the long weekend with him." "You're crazy," says my sister. "Risk his parents asking him where he got that expensive model plane from? I don't think so. It's got to be somewhere around here. Don't just stand there looking so gormless. Help me to look for it properly. It's got to be somewhere here."
We hastily pull out clothes from wardrobes, empty out drawers, in a heated frenzy, no longer concerning ourselves with keeping the bedroom looking halfway decent. We don't care about that anymore. It now looks like a hurricane has hit it, as puddles of clothes are dangling on the wooden posts of Robert's bed, over the dresser, across lampshades, and are being trampled in the floor by our boots, or rather our sneakers, but we don't care. Such meagre considerations do not trouble us now. We open the large drawer under Robert's bed, discarding all the toys, and to my amazement I recover so many things of mine he must have taken from me, going back years. A model of a dinosaur, a couple of toy cars, a handful of large, stunning marbles, a water pistol. But I regret to say the plane could not be found anywhere. My sister is putting her hands on her hips. She's out of breath with frustration. It's clear to see on her face.
"I don't understand. It's got to be here. Unless..."
"Unless what?" I say.
"Unless it's somewhere else in this house."
I groan. "We can't possibly search the rest of the house, sis. It would take us forever to do that."
"What's in the box up there?"
asks my sister. "The box there, on the wardrobe. Can you see it?"
"It's rather difficult to see, but it's right there at the back."
We both look at each other, because even before we reach for that box, we know we found our lost treasure.
"I can't believe it. I couldn't believe that we didn't look on top of the cupboard properly,"
says my sister, dragging down the box. We tear it open, and sure enough we find my model plane buried beneath a light blanket.
"It's here! Oh my God, it's here!"
My sister and I give each other a high five. My face lights up into a broad beam.
"I've got my model aircraft back! I'm so happy!"
I discard the blanket on the floor from the box and put all the other stuff that Robert had stolen from me over the years into the box. It gives me a great sense of satisfaction to know that Robert will realise I've taken all my stuff back. "Let's go," my sister says. "Surely we should clean up," I suggest.
"Are you kidding? Robert brought this on himself. Maybe he'll think twice before he steals again."
I decide my sister's absolutely right. So we retreat from Robert's bedroom, switching off the light and opening up the curtains. We tiptoe through the house cautiously. Before long we find ourselves leaving the backyard. I nearly jump out of my skin when I hear this loud, clamouring commotion that sounds like the bins are being banged together very hard. The noise interrupts the silence so rudely, it was difficult not to become unduly startled.
"Calm down," whispers my sister. "It's nothing to worry about. It's just raccoons. See?"
She flashes her torch on the large bin to prove her point, so that the area around the bins is flooded with her torchlight. We hear a large squeaking sound, as if a small animal is in distress. What the hell was that? The ominous sound sends chills down my spine. The light of my sister's torch hovers over an ambiguous creature who has a wiggling raccoon in his hands. But on seeing us, he is so astounded, so astonished, he drops and releases the raccoon. The raccoon is so surprised to have been set free, and dashes away hurriedly, not daring to look back, not even for a moment. I am so stunned by what I'm beholding that I actually drop the box I'm carrying with my model plane onto the ground, so that it crashes onto the dew-laden grass. Toys, clothes, and a black string bag containing my marbles spill out and roll onto the yard. My mouth drops open. I'm staring at this creature with such abject astonishment that even though every part of me is screaming, "Run! Run! Run!" there's another part of me that believes I've got to be dreaming. This can't be real. I'm staring at a Bigfoot. The creature is easily over 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, covered with long flowing hair, the colour of black coal, with a face that is remarkably human. High cheekbones, a flat aquatic nose, and a furrowed, deeply wrinkled forehead, and deep-set eyes that give off a blazing yellow eye-shine. Even though the Bigfoot is not remotely aggressive towards us, that could so easily be a clever ruse, a manipulative deception to catch us off guard. Suffice to say, he's so intimidating, so Herculean in size, so lofty, so powerful, that he scares the hell out of the both of us. It's hard to describe how daunting he is, as he makes me painfully aware of how inconspicuously small I am, by contrast to him. I feel as if I'm standing yards away from an apex predator. My feet begin to backtrack as I stare at the creature. "Run!" my sister screams. "Run!" I jump out of my trance-like state and begin to run down the street behind my sister, who's ahead of me by just a hair's breadth. My heart thunders through my chest. My legs run like they've never run before, as the adrenaline courses through my bloodstream. Then I hear the creature chasing us. Oh my God! Oh my God! The ground heaves, thunders, groans and vibrates as I hear his ponderous feet bashing the ground with heavy jolts. It sounds as if he's banging heavy, clanging frying pans together. My heart is booming so loudly in my ears. Oh my God! This thing is going to kill us! I want to scream. I really do. But I can't. My jaw is locked together. My fingers are clammy and sweaty. My breath is furiously fast. I can feel sweat pouring down my face. I can feel the creature's moist breath breathing on my neck. Then I feel the most terrifying feeling of all. A hand grabs me from behind, and I turn to find myself staring into the Bigfoot's eyes. He grunts. He lets go of his hold of me, and then hands me the box of my stuff that I dropped on the ground moments before. I then hear the audible words in my head. How was the creature speaking to me?
"I might look scary, but I'm not. I didn't mean to frighten you."
The creature then turns around and walks away. "Give him some of your marbles," my sister says. "Bigfoots love marbles. I remember reading about it. Go on, hurry up before he goes away. He's so very nice. We got him all wrong. Go on, give him the marbles." I fumble around in my box and pull out the bag of marbles in the black string bag that Robert had stolen from me, and I quickly run after the Bigfoot. Excuse me, sir. I don't know how else to address you." He turns around to look at me directly, and in that moment I am truly humbled. I can see the creature has the kindest eyes I have ever beheld. How could I have been so frightened of him? How could I have got him so wrong? I feel ashamed of my hasty reaction. Could I have personally offended the creature? It would seem so. "This is for you," I say, dropping the bag of marbles into his large hands. I notice his fingers are so big, but they're trembling with excitement. They quickly open the velvety black string bag. The Bigfoot pulls one large marble after another out of the black string bag and inspects them closely. I'll tell you, those marbles were pretty special, filled with glitter and exquisite colours, given to me by an aunt of mine, who has an eye for beautiful things. If I thought that Robert was enthused the first time he'd seen my model aircraft, it was nothing on the Bigfoot's reaction to my marbles. The Bigfoot was absolutely thrilled with my gift. His eyes lit up and almost danced with joy as he examined one marble after another, looking up at me with bright, twinkling eyes. He let out a whistle as if to say, "These are so awesome." He reaches out to pat me gently on the cheek, and I hear in my head, "Beautiful, quite beautiful. Thank you. I'll always treasure." I couldn't believe the creature had actually spoken to me telepathically. I mean, how does that actually happen? My sister and I watch in awe as we see him glide away. He moves with such an elegant grace. My sister and I were hugging each other impulsively. "We saw a Bigfoot! We saw a Bigfoot!" we both say, jumping up and down, as if all our Christmases had come at once. Indeed, it felt like they had. It was like in one night, astonishment had bounded into fear, and fear into joyful appreciation and wondrous awe. I knew that this would be a night that I would never, ever forget. And all these years later, I consider it one of the most exciting things to have ever happened to me. It was a privilege and honour to meet such a majestic creature, but there was something outer-worldly about him that I still can't put a finger on. To cut a long story short, retrieving my plane from my friend's house was nothing on encountering that Bigfoot. I am convinced he must have come from the wooded area at the end of our road, that all those years ago had not been bulldozed to make housing developments. When my friend discovered his room had been ransacked, he did actually phone me. "So you got your stuff back then? Thanks for leaving my room in such a tip. I got into a heap of trouble with my parents for the bomb site. It was no more than you deserved. Why did you steal all my stuff anyway?" "Well, it wasn't a big deal." I'm so glad all these years later, Robert and I remain good friends. He has left the days of thieving behind him. We even joke about it now. But back then, it was no laughing matter. But believe it or not, Robert did become a pilot. And now he's very strict about his children ever lying to him. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, my name is Steve, and I've been a private investigator for over 20 years now, and I've done all kinds of private investigations, from insurance fraud to all manner of highly personal cases. My Bigfoot encounter occurred during one of my investigations, when the last thing on my mind was actually encountering the hairy critter, whom until then I would have believed was as fictitious as Father Christmas or the Tooth Fairy. I now stand corrected, and I'm much more sober and open-minded in my judgments these days, as I'm forced to conclude that we do not know everything that is out there. This mysterious world of ours clutches many secrets like sparkling jewels tightly to her breast, and conceals them in our midst. Yet to the seekers out there she may share some of her jewels of revelation that come with a cost, for the wise discerning man that can see clearly is considered a fool by the man that is indeed blind, for the blind man arrogantly believes he knows it all, but the sighted man of wisdom has conceded that there is much still to know that he knows not. For the fool presumes he knows, but the wise man discerns and assumes not. I am from Seattle in Washington State, and have lived in this part of the world all my life, and I grew up in a leafy green suburb of Washington with my sister Andrea, who was a couple of years older than me at the time, and my mother and dad. Growing up, my mother was a hairdresser in downtown Seattle, and sometimes my sister and I would help her in her hair salon during the school holidays, sweeping up the hair off the floor and washing our customers' hair. I remember I loved hanging out in the hair salon because the stories people would share with my mother quite frankly boggled the mind, and being a nosy Parker by nature, I listened in on all these interesting snippets of conversation. For some reason people tend to let go of their inhibitions when they're being pampered, and they would spill out the beans about so many things that they would possibly never usually talk about so freely. I remember my ears would be flapping as I listened to people's stories, and sometimes they concerned people that I actually knew that lived in my neck of the woods, so those stories were particularly interesting to me. I learnt, for example, that Mrs. Murray at number 26 had had a ghostly encounter at her home and was so terrified that she'd actually called out a team of paranormal investigators. I learnt that Mrs. Elliot, who my mother knew personally as one of her clients, had actually been spotted in a coffee bar in Seattle, seemingly getting up close and personal, or rather too familiar and over-cosy with another man, who was clearly not her husband. Then there was the ever so annoying and belligerent Mr. Parker, the very disagreeable, cantankerous man that nobody on our street liked, who worked as a roofer and had recently put in a hefty claim at an insurance company based on his disability caused by a roofing accident, whereby he claimed he couldn't work anymore because he had severely damaged his back. Yet he had been spotted by his neighbour carrying heavy amounts of furniture into his house. So I ask you, how bad could his back really be? Growing up, I was put simply a nosy Parker who was always fascinated by other people and by human behaviour. Believe it or not, the human species is actually rather interesting to watch because we're all so curiously different. I remember my parents had brought me a pair of binoculars for bird watching the previous Christmas, and so I thought I'd observe the human species rather than the feathery kind. I decided to go and spy on Mr. Parker to see whether he was making false claims to the insurance company. I know it wasn't really significant to me, nor really any of my business at the time, but being naturally curious by nature, I could not wait to see if the claims made about him were actually true. So the very next afternoon I spent a couple of days watching the comings and goings of Mr. Parker. I had never liked the cranky, tumultuous man because he made no secret of the fact that he absolutely loathed children, and he seemed to hate and positively despise everybody else's dog, apart from his own, of course. His dog was a mischievous black Labrador called Mutt, who was always perfect in his partisan, very biased eyes, and despite his dog's appalling behaviour, it was everybody else's dogs that got reprimanded, except his, of course. He always frowned upon us as kids and regarded us as a lower form of pond life. I thought it would be good to get even with him, especially after he had the audacity to tell me that my Pekingese dog Crispin looked like a drowned rat with a flat nose, and really was quite an ugly-looking dog. "It beats me," he would say, "why you would keep such an ugly dog, and not something intelligent and more manly like my Labrador Mutt." I would tell him that Crispin was a very attractive, intelligent dog, which was indeed true, and to stop being so rude and offensive to other people's animals. So on this particular day, as I watched his house curiously, I noticed a man sitting in the car on the opposite side of the road, using a very tiny pair of inconspicuous binoculars to watch Mr. Parker's coming and goings. I knew instinctively that he was a private investigator spying on Mr. Parker to see if he was conning the insurance company out of a sizable, large financial settlement. I watched Mr. Parker coming out of the front door of his house. He was bent over double, looking like a decrepit old man, wearing a paisley dressing gown and a pair of grey slip-on slippers. He was hobbling very precariously on his walking stick, as if every movement pained him. He put on an agonising, wincing expression on his face and patted his back awkwardly, as if he was in dreadful pain. For the less discerning, it appeared that the poor man was indeed physically compromised, because his clever performance was remarkably convincing. I noticed his steely hawk-like eyes were pinned on the cars parked on the opposite side of the road. As he furtively looked from left to right, glancing and checking to see if anyone was indeed spying on him, I realised that the private investigator parked on the street opposite had slipped down his seat so that he could not be observed. There were other empty cars parked there, so the private detective's car did not appear unnaturally suspicious, nor did it stand out. Mr. Parker physically relaxed when he thought no one had observed him, but he still hobbled awkwardly into the house just to be sure no one was watching. Now, Mr. Parkinson, or Mr. Parker if you like, well, he had a black Labrador mix, as I told you, called Mutt, and on this occasion the excitable dog had slipped out of the front door and was tearing down the open front yard to the house on the opposite side of the street, where he liked to bark at Molly, the beautiful golden retriever who would be sitting behind the fence in her backyard, looking ever so regal in her long flowing golden coat. I always sensed that she had a rather high opinion of herself. For some unknown reason, those two dogs just love barking at each other, and this raucous behaviour invariably always incensed Mr. Parkinson, who suddenly, in a moment of anger, straightened out his hunched back and raced across the road. His black Labrador mutt was barking jubilantly at Molly, who was reciprocating with much more higher-pitched series of barks. "Shut up, Molly," shouted Mr. Parker. "You're upsetting my dog," he shouted. It was so typical for him to blame somebody else's dog for bad behaviour, as it never even crossed his mind or even dawned upon him that his dog was indeed the instigator of the frenzied barking. I watched in absolute shock and horror as Mr. Parkinson bent over double to drag Mutt by the collar, where he maintained a stooped position for a long time, pulling Mutt across the road, back to his house as quickly as he could. In that moment his cover was well and truly blown, especially when Mutt was declining to get back into the house and simply sat on the lawn, refusing to budge. So Mr. Parker, in exasperation, picked up the disgruntled-looking Mutt into his arms and carried him with little difficulty back into the house, where he surreptitiously closed the front door behind him, glancing quickly across the street at the cars parked across the road, with a rather worried expression on his face. I could indeed discern the triumphant look of the private investigator's face as he clicked his camera and took several photographs, and then he drove away. It was in that moment that I definitely remember the seed was sown, and I began to feel very certain that I fancied becoming a private investigator one day. As a young boy, I would learn things about people that other people did not comprehend. I knew, for example, that the man everybody thought that Mrs. Elliot was having an affair with was in fact her twin brother, whom she hadn't seen for over 2 years at the time, and was exceptionally close to him. I also learnt that Mrs. Murray was sleeping in the cottage away from her main house, because a ghostly apparition of a strange man kept standing at the end of her bed at night, and it was freaking her out. I gather she believed it was the ghost of her father-in-law, who had hated and despised her in life, and she believed was extracting some kind of revenge in the hereafter. I learnt that she had moved into the cottage to avoid the nightly visitations from this menacing spectre. When I would tell my mother some of these things I knew, she would say in a nonchalant way, "You have the makings of a remarkable private detective." And those words were indeed like a fertiliser to the seed that was sown in my life, and that all led to me becoming a private investigator. And so it was shortly after I got married, I finally set up my own sleuthing business, or detective agency if you like. And although I made a series of foolish blunders along my journey, it was not long before I became pretty skilled at the job in hand, acquiring an uncanny knack of remaining hidden in plain sight and taking on all manner of various disguises whenever necessary. There were negative aspects to the job, of course, like working irregular hours and spending hours at a time in a car waiting for your suspect to leave the premises. But on the whole, watching people is very interesting, which is why all those reality television shows and social media, of course, have become so popular of late, as invariably people are quite fascinated with each other's lives. Yet I always do frequently warn my own kids never to get zealous of all the social media stuff that they observe, where you see people plastering happy faces and idyllic lavish photographs of their seemingly perfect holidays at fancy ski resorts in Aspen, or tea on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, or a cruise in the Caribbean. A lot of the stuff you invariably observe or see is not what it ever appears, and it would not surprise me at all, for example, if the girl in question is deeply depressed in her daily life, or drinks excessively, or is actually cleaning the toilets at the ski resort. Yet to an impressionable outside observer, looking at her photographs, it's easy to become intimidated with feelings of inadequacy. You might falsely believe, for example, that she was deliriously happy with a very enviable, opulent, lavish lifestyle. Maybe the highly airbrushed photographs would make him or her appear seemingly flawless, which is also a fabrication. This is the deceptive imagery she wants to project and convey to all her viewers in social media, but it's possibly not at all true. I see these misleading portrayals of people's lives over and over again, from celebrities to the girl next door, and as a private detective, in reality, nothing surprises me anymore. apart from the story I'm going to convey to you now, that surprised the hell out of me. My sister, her husband, and both of her 2 sisters are part of my sleuthing team, so you could say it's a family business that I've been running now for over 20 years. And most of our investigations start with an inquiry on the telephone, which invariably leads to an appointment with the individual in question, where we decide whether we can offer our services to the client or not. My strange, rather curious story begins when an affluent, tall, dark, rather debonair, handsome man came into my offices one day. He was wearing a very smart Broke Brothers suit and a pair of very stylish leather brogues. He looked rather uncomfortable as he stood there, shifting awkwardly from one leg to another, and appearing as if the last place he wanted to be was in an investigator's office. I offered the man a seat, and he sat up so straight, looking even more on edge as when he was standing up, and he nervously ran his hands through his smooth hair. "What can I do for you?" I asked, looking at the man more closely. He was very clean-shaven, with a deep-set pair of earnest brown eyes and a rather boyish-looking face. He cleared his throat, looking rather uncomfortable for a moment. "I think my wife may be cheating on me," he said, blurting out the words so quickly as if he detested the very sound of them. "I see," I said. "May I ask you why you believe this to be the case?" "Well," he said, "she's not herself these days. She seems all distant and detached towards me." "Well, there can be all kinds of reasons that can happen," I assured him. "Then there's the fact that she never seems to answer her cell phone when I call her at any time of the day." "I see," I said. "Well, some people might not answer because they're busy. Or maybe she just doesn't feel in the mood. There could be all kinds of reasons." "No," said the man. "I know my wife, and she always used to answer the phone. I'm terrified I'm going to lose her. She's my world, and she's so stunningly beautiful." "Have you got a photograph of her?" I asked. The man was shaking as he opened the wallet and handed me the photograph of his wife. The young woman smiling back at me in the picture looked like the girl next door, and not what I was expecting to see at all in the photograph, because she seemed like a decent, wholesome sort of girl who didn't appear to be the type to go cavorting around bars, picking up strange men. She was very modestly attired in a pair of jeans and a T-shirt, and did not give me the impression of a high-maintenance sort of girl that spends extortionate amounts of money on lavish beauty treatments or designer clothes, nor did she look like the type eager to attract attention from interested men by languishing around the place like a peacock strutting her feathers. "Do you believe your wife is the type of person who would cheat on you?" I asked. "No. She's shy and she's quiet and unassuming," he said. "Look," I said to him, "I'm going to be very straight with you, and that is that nothing you have said gives me any cause to believe or even suggest remotely that your wife is cheating upon you. Nothing you have said to me is ringing any alarm bells in my head. There could be, of course, a very rational explanation why she doesn't answer your telephone calls. And as for being distant, maybe she's going through a challenging time lately. We are not all robots programmed to behave the same way all the time. We're humans, and things in life can sometimes drag us down or lift us up." "What are you saying to me?" said the man. "That you're not willing to take my case because my wife does not dress provocatively enough and comes home smelling of men's aftershave? Is not my money of any value to you compared to the next man's?" "I am not saying that I won't investigate your case," I interceded, "but I just think you might consider being straight with your wife and asking her what indeed is the matter and why is she being so distant lately, because maybe you really need to communicate a lot better, that's all. There really could be a very rational reason why she's very disconnected recently. Look, I don't want to be suspicious, nor do I want to be the interrogating husband prying into my wife's affairs. I'm just asking you to follow her for a couple of days, that's all, so I know what she gets up to when my back is turned. I've no peace of mind worrying about what she's getting up to all day. It stresses me out a lot." "Oh, very well," I said. "I'll do it." The young gentleman thanked me and proceeded to give me all the details of his home that was situated in a wooded, very countrified area of Washington State, and he also gave me photographs of his wife, who was called Tansy. A few days later, I found myself driving to a very spectacular area of Washington state, where there were mountainous valleys, pretty meadows, and beautiful wooded areas. It was not long before I came across the pretty home where my client lived with his wife. They did indeed live in a beautiful Cape Cod-style home on the edge of a white gravel road that was situated directly opposite a wooded area that was accessible to both hikers and cyclists. The pretty pale blue house was symmetrical in appearance, with an attractive arched front entranceway, and it possessed double-hung windows with stylish shutters and a steep dark roof with side gables and overhang and some gabled dormers. There was a long cobbled path that led to the white front door, and on either side of the door were very stylized pots filled with pretty flowering white plants. I imagine the entertainment area must have been around the rear end of the property. The front yard was extremely pretty, with a scattering of fruit trees along with the traditional evergreen firs so typically seen in Washington state. I parked my car behind a couple of crooked trees with twisted, gnarled roots that jutted out on the edge of the gravel road, so that if the wife came out of the property in her car, I would cautiously be able to follow her without being detected. On the first day of my investigation, the young woman was wearing jeans and a white blouse with her short-length brown hair tied back in a ponytail. I watched her parking her car very haphazardly in her parking spot. She climbed out of the car and darted across the road very hurriedly. I was aware that she kept looking at her cell phone to check out the time, which made me indeed wonder if she was meeting someone. I watched her scurry into a bookshop, and I noticed she was looking at books like The Power of Meditation, Learning to Love Yourself, and Advanced Yoga Techniques. She purchased all three of the books and raced towards a coffee shop very quickly, where she met up with a stranger older-looking lady with short-cropped silvery hair and very large eclectic-looking bright pink glasses. Tansy, my client's wife, ordered a round of iced coffees for them both, and after they were served by the sweet-looking waitress, I immediately moved to a table within hearing distance to eavesdrop in on the conversation. To my astonishment, the older woman sitting opposite Tansy reached into her large carrier bag and pulled out a bunch of tarot cards from the deck, which she began to shuffle them vigorously in her manicured hands with her long pink painted talons. I realised immediately that Tansy was having a tarot reading, and I observed that other people in the coffee shop were watching from a distance with curious, intrigued expressions written on their faces. "What do you want to know?" asked the woman. Tansy looked thoughtful for a moment. "I'm not sure. I just want to know what the cards are going to say about my life." "Well, this looks good," said the lady. "I see that you're on a spiritual search. The cards are showing me a longing and a ravenous hunger to find answers to everything in your life, and that is very good indeed, for we should all be searching." "That's right," said Tansy. "I'm trying to find myself, I think. I've felt lost for a very long time, wondering what on earth I was doing here, and what my purpose could possibly be. This card here," she continued, "suggests that you struggle to articulate and communicate your thoughts and feelings, and you feel somewhat repressed emotionally." "Yes, I think that's right," reflected Tansy. "I've never been great at expressing my feelings. I'm actually rather reserved." "I see you're doing very fine in the love department. You seem to have won 2 hearts of very tall men that are clearly besotted about you." Tansy giggled. "My husband's tall, but I'm not aware of another admirer out there." "Oh, he is out there, believe me, and he's potty about you." My ears perked up as I listened to this conversation. Could Tansy know who this mystery admirer was? And was she in fact seeing him, as my client had suggested, behind his back, and acting all nonchalant about it? The following morning I was parked in my usual hiding spot, when to my amazement Tansy came straight out of her house, not in her car, but on her own, and in one arm she was carrying a yoga mat, and the other hand a portable water bottle. I noticed she was wearing pink workout leggings and a matching top, and she was heading straight towards the wooded area on the opposite side of the road from her house. Was she meeting someone, I wondered, or was she going to do some yoga in the woods? I immediately followed her from a distance along the hiking trail, making absolutely certain she remained oblivious to my presence. The woods were quite spectacular this spring morning, and the forest was full of interesting trees, from maples to ash and cottonwood, and the sound of the warbles and chirps of the pretty songbirds could be heard all across the valley. The paths had been superbly maintained by the Forestry Commission, I imagine, but I got the very distinct impression that this serene wooded area was not frequented regularly by many people, as it was a little off the beaten track and not so easily accessible, except to the locals in the immediate area. I could hear the sounds of water as I kept a safe distance behind Tansy. I then discovered that she was moving towards an exquisite-looking stream that meandered through the woods and made a calming gushing sound so indicative of flowing water. I watched as Tansy placed down her yoga mat and sat down on the ground with her palms facing upwards on her crossed legs as she began to make those strange meditational sounds with her eyes tightly closed. In truth, I felt rather uncomfortable spying on Tansy like this, and was beginning to feel a bit like a peeping Tom, and that was not a feeling that rested well with me, I can tell you. I was just about to walk away when I realised to my amazement that I was not the only person spying on Tansy, and this alarmed me. Loitering in the shadows was a dark form that appeared to be peering through the bush at the young woman meditating on the mat. At first I observed the cone-shaped head, which was so high off the ground that I realised that whatever this thing was, he was easily over 7 foot tall. Suddenly, fortunately, I got a much better view of the creature, as with one long arm he pressed down a large piece of foliage, and I realised in astonishment that this creature, whom I imagine must have been male, was looking upon Tansy with a passionate adulation. It was clear that he had a huge crush on the young woman, and I realised he must have watched her doing meditation in the woods over a period of time and grown rather accustomed to her presence here, but he definitely liked her a lot. Yet it was very clear he remained rather elusive and quiet, and she had no idea that he was actually there. While the critter was hiding behind the foliage, I never observed more than his leathery grey skin, flat nose and prominent brow ridge. But his face appeared remarkably human-like, with deep-set animated gold eyes that looked intelligent and kind, and as crazy as this may sound, he looked like he was a rather congeniable, likeable sort of fellow, who was easy-going and relaxed, and never given to aggression or anger. I know it probably sounds crazy, but that is what I discerned from the creature's energy, and as a private investigator, I do tend to read people's energy remarkably well. I can usually tell within 2 minutes of a meeting whether someone is friendly, reticent, shifty, or even aggressive. I watched Tansy finish her meditation, do a couple of yoga stretches, and then finally roll up her mat, while she drank a sip of water from her bottle, and then she walked out of the forest, while the creature watched her leave. I remained hidden behind the tree where I'd been hiding, and I was relieved that the creature had not observed me, although I highly doubt he would have been aggressive towards me. If he had seen me, I suspect he would have possibly just glided away very quickly. As soon as Tansy had disappeared, the creature crouched down on all fours with his overlong arms and long powerful legs, and placed his flat nose on the ground, and was smelling intently the very place where Tansy had been. He seemed to savour the smell like someone enjoying the smell of sweet cinnamon buns, or the sweet summer smell of fresh roses. He then rolled his long, brawny, sinewy body on the ground, like a dog rolling in the grass, covering himself with dirt, as if he wanted to soak up the smell of Tansy's body. I knew by the jubilant expression on the creature's face that Tansy had a very big, hairy admirer, and then I remembered the tarot reading the previous day, and how Tansy had been informed that she had a secret admirer, who was no other than Bigfoot himself. I chuckled to myself at this startling revelation, for before today I hadn't even believed that Bigfoot was real. The creature was 7 foot and about 3 foot wide, with long lean legs and very muscular, brawny, sinewy body, and he was covered in long, flowing, shaggy, deep auburn hair, and he was very majestic and beautiful in a unique kind of way. But everyone has a different perception of beauty, but in my opinion, this creature was just that. Later that day, when I returned to the office, I called Tansy's husband to come and see me urgently. I will never forget how ghostly pale the poor man looked when he finally entered my offices. He was quite literally shaking in his boots, and when I offered him a chair, he declined to sit down. Out with it, he said, shifting on his legs awkwardly. Is my wife having an affair? No, she's not, I said. The relief that flooded over the young man's face was like a person on death row being given a last-minute reprieve. The young man pulled out a chair and sat down. Well, What did you find out? I found out that your wife is on a journey of discovery. She's on a search, trying to find out who she is. The young man looked puzzled. My wife knows who she is, he said. I'm not meaning literally, I said to him. I'm meaning more spiritually. From what I observed, your wife is just soul-searching, which is why she may be rather introverted at the moment. She is possibly meditating on her thoughts. And as for answering her cell phone, spiritual people often don't, because they're concerning themselves with things beyond this world. I see, said the man. There is a way you could connect with her, I suggested. Really, he asked. How? Why don't you buy her a book on meditation and discuss doing some of these practices together? With an interest in common, you may find she will open up to you. I will do that, said the man. Thank you very much. There's just one more delicate issue that I have to discuss with you. Go on, said the young man. Your wife appears to have a secret admirer. What? Said the man. What the hell? Who is this dude? I'll kill him when I get hold of him. Let's just say when your wife was meditating in the woods, there was a hot-blooded male watching over her. So if I was you, I would advise her possibly not to meditate in the woods, just for precautionary reasons. I don't believe your wife is in any danger, because her admirer seems to be a very harmful, reticent sort of fellow. Needless to say, it's possibly not the wisest things to do, is to meditate in the woods. You could create a cosy area in your yard for such an activity. I did happen to notice that you have a rather superb-looking yard. Would you believe it, a week later the young man actually phoned me and told me that he'd taken my advice and transformed his marriage, and he couldn't thank me enough. He told me that he and his wife were meditating together, and that they had turned the area in their yard into a calmful, restful retreat with a waterfall and a rock pool and an exquisite wooden deck with swinging chairs and cosy mats, as well as an in-house bar. It sounds wonderful, I said. It's more than wonderful, he said. I have my wife back again, and it's all thanks to you. The very next day, the man sent me a box of the finest French champagne. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.